Hello everyone, and welcome back to Crime Stories for Sleep. I'm Robert, and before we begin, I'd like to ask for a little support. Subscribe, leave a like, and if you do, let me know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. These may seem like small gestures, but they are essential to help the channel grow and allow me to keep bringing you these stories every night. Now, lower the volume just a bit, get comfortable, turn off the lights, and let us dive together into tonight's first story. Story 1. The atmosphere inside the Bamu family's Paris apartment was thick with the particular kind of excited chaos that only the Christmas season can bring. It was December 2010, and for the 5 youngest members of the Bamu family, life seemed bright with possibility. They were preparing to embark on a journey, a trip across the Channel to London to spend the holidays with their older sister Magali and her partner Eric Bikubi. For Christy, a bright and kind-hearted 15-year-old, this trip was a source of tremendous excitement. London was a city of dreams, and the thought of celebrating Christmas there, surrounded by family, was a fantasy coming true. His mother and father, Pierre and Jacqueline, said goodbye to their children with the mixture of pride and mild worry familiar to all parents. Magali, 29 years old, was the reliable big sister, a figure of authority and love. Her boyfriend, Eric, a 28-year-old football coach, was someone Christy and his siblings looked up to, a charismatic presence they saw as an uncle figure. The family had roots in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and while they'd made their home in France, their cultural heritage remained strong. The youngsters, though, were thoroughly modern Parisians, their heads filled with school, friends, and the universal dreams of teenagers everywhere. As they packed their bags, there was no shadow of darkness, no sense of foreboding, just the pure anticipation of a Christmas filled with lights, laughter, and love. The journey itself passed in a blur of excitement. The train sliding through the tunnel was like a silver snake carrying them toward adventure. Christy and her siblings, Ives, Kelly, and 2 younger ones, chatted and laughed constantly, their voices weaving a tapestry of youthful energy. They arrived at Magali and Eric's flat in Newham, a high-rise in East London, where they were warmly welcomed. The home, though modest, was meant to be their holiday sanctuary. For a brief, blissful time, it was exactly that. The first few days overflowed with the simple joys of family reunion, shared meals, stories exchanged, and the comfortable ease of being together. But a darkness was gathering at the edges of this seemingly happy scene, a darkness rooted in a belief system that seemed alien to London's bright streets. That darkness was called Kindoki. In the language of their Congolese heritage, it meant witchcraft, a belief in evil spirits and the power of people to cast curses and bring misfortune. For Eric Bikubi, this wasn't a relic of the past, but an immediate, genuine threat. He was consumed by it, his mind fertile ground for paranoia. He'd accused people of witchcraft before, seeing its sinister presence in everyday occurrences. His worldview was a lens that warped rational thought into frightening shapes. The trigger, the tiny incident that would irreversibly shatter the Bamu family, was as small as it was catastrophic. Christy, in an ordinary childhood accident, wet himself. In most households, this would have been briefly embarrassing, then forgotten. But in the charged atmosphere of Eric Bikubi's mind, it became evidence. It became proof. He seized on it with cold certainty, his eyes turning hard. This wasn't an accident, he declared. It was Kindoki's doing. The accusation hung heavy and suffocating. Bikubi's attention immediately zeroed in on Christy and 2 of his sisters. He accused them of witchcraft, claiming they'd brought an evil spirit into his home, one that was negatively affecting his own young child. The festive atmosphere vanished, replaced by a cold, pervasive fear. Of course, the children denied it. Their faces showed a mixture of confusion and terror. This was a nightmare, a story from a world beyond their understanding. But Magali, their sister whom they'd traveled so far to see, didn't defend them. Horrifyingly, She sided with her boyfriend, her words echoing his incredible claims. She too began seeing witches in her own siblings' faces. The betrayal felt like a physical blow knocking the wind from them. They were trapped, stranded in a foreign city, in a flat that had transformed from refuge to prison. The person meant to protect them had become an accuser. The interrogation began. It wasn't conversation, but prosecution. For days, Bikubi and Magali questioned the children relentlessly. Accusations of witchcraft filled the flat's reality. They were denied food, water, and sleep, a systematic breaking down of their bodies and spirits. The siblings were forced to fast and pray, their cries of innocence ignored. The loving sister and uncle figure had become terrifying beings, their faces twisted by irrational certainty. Soon, Bikubi's focus narrowed exclusively on Christy. The boy became the center of all his suspicion, the vessel for the evil he aimed to expel. The violence began escalating at a terrifying pace. What started as angry shouting and accusations quickly turned physical. Bikubi, a football coach familiar with strength and power, turned his force on a 15-year-old boy, using whatever was at hand as an instrument of harm. The flat became a chamber of torture. Over 3 days, Christy Bamu endured an ordeal that defies comprehension. He was beaten with sticks and metal bars, each impact echoing like a dreadful drumbeat in the cramped space. His siblings, paralyzed by fear and panic, were forced to watch and, more horrifically, to participate in attacking their own brother. Any refusal from them only redirected the violence onto themselves, trapping them in a never-ending cycle of terror. Their love for their brother was twisted into a weapon against him. The brutality became more focused and cruel. Bikubi and Magali used a hammer and chisel, tools meant for construction, in an act of pure destruction. They smashed Christy's teeth, the sound of breaking bone leaving an indelible scar on those who heard it. They broke ceramic floor tiles over his head, shards mixing with his blood on the ground. Bottles were shattered against his body. With pliers, they twisted and tore at his ear. A deeply personal and monstrous form of abuse. Throughout this unimaginable suffering, Christy's will to survive persisted. He reacted as any child would when faced with such incomprehensible pain from those he trusted. He begged for mercy. His pleas, hoarse with agony and fear, rang through the apartment. He asked for forgiveness again and again. His sister Kelly would later testify in court about what she witnessed. But Magali remained unmoved, her face showing nothing but cold attachment. She didn't intervene. Kelly remembered her saying, "We had it coming." In a final desperate attempt to end the torment, Christy and his sisters resorted to the only option left. They confessed. They claimed to be witches, hoping this false admission would satisfy their abusers. For Christy's sisters, it brought temporary relief from the beatings. But for Christy, it sealed his fate. The confession only reinforced Bikubi's twisted beliefs. With the supposed witch having admitted guilt, the purification ritual needed to be completed. By Christmas morning 2010, Christy Bamu was barely recognizable. His body showed more than 100 separate injuries. He was broken, starved of food and water, and in excruciating pain. He no longer begged for forgiveness. He begged for death. That day, while others celebrated peace and goodwill, Magali and Bikubi placed a phone call to Pierre Bamu in Paris. The conversation was surreal, a transmission from a reality gone insane. "Dad, you need to come get the children because they're witches and you're one too," Magali told her father. Then Bikubi took the phone, his tone eerily calm. "You need to come get the children," he said. "You must pick up Christy because he's a witch casting spells on another family's child. If you don't, I will kill him." Pierre, shocked and horrified, tried to reason with him. For a brief moment, he heard his son's voice, not crying but disturbingly calm, as if he'd moved beyond fear itself. "Dad, come for me. Christie said quietly before the line went dead. Pierre struggled to comprehend what was happening, but clung to the hope that Eric, the good man he thought he knew, wouldn't follow through on his threat. That hope would be shattered within hours. The final stage of the exorcism was meant as a ritual cleansing. Bikubi and Magali dragged Christie's battered body to the bathroom and forced him into the bathtub, then turned on the water. A final, lethal assault on a body already devastated by days of abuse and neglect. Christie finally succumbed beneath the surface and drowned. He was just 15 years old. The scene that followed was one of absolute horror. Bikubi attempted a half-hearted revival before calling emergency services. Paramedics arrived expecting a typical drowning, but instead had found what looked like a slaughterhouse. Blood was everywhere, on walls, curtains, floors. Shattered, blood-stained tiles littered the living room. Tools like hammers, metal bars, and pliers lay scattered, bearing traces of skin, hair, and blood from their gruesome use. The entire flat was chaos. In the midst of this stood the surviving children, hysterical, soaked, terrified, physically and emotionally scarred by being forced to participate and witness. Unable to speak English, their frantic French and Lingala poured out trauma that was initially incomprehensible to first responders. When police arrived, the grim truth of what had happened on Christmas Day in a London apartment began to emerge. Eric Bikubi and Magali Bamu were arrested. The subsequent investigation would piece together the timeline of horror, relying heavily on the traumatic accounts of Christie's siblings. The trial at the Old Bailey gripped the media, presenting a shocking story of ancient beliefs playing out in a modern city. The courtroom heard the gruesome details of Christie's final days. Eric Bikubi admitted to causing Christie's death, but pleaded guilty to manslaughter, citing diminished responsibility. His legal team argued he suffered from a schizophrenia-like condition and had brain damage, leading him to genuinely believe Christie was a witch and a threat. Magali Bamu pleaded not guilty to murder. She claimed she'd been coerced, that Bikubi's control over her was so complete she felt forced to join in the attacks. Her defense portrayed her as another victim of Bikubi's madness, someone who'd been cut off from her family and faced imprisonment because of his actions. The prosecution, however, offered a different view. They argued that Bikubi, while possibly struggling with some mental health issues, was fully aware of his actions. Lead prosecutor Brian Altman QC called his behavior torture and said he'd committed brutality on an unimaginable scale. As for Magali, the prosecution maintained she was a willing participant who had acted independently, subjecting her own brother to severe cruelty and fueling the violence Bikubi initiated. Her lack of remorse throughout the trial was striking. She never expressed any sorrow. The jury, after hearing weeks of agonizing testimony, rejected the defense arguments. They found both Eric Bikubi and Magali Bamu guilty of murder. At sentencing, Judge David Paget delivered a scathing assessment. He described the killing as containing elements of sadism, an instance of prolonged torture involving both psychological and physical suffering before death. He acknowledged Bikubi's brain injury and his genuine belief in witchcraft, but was clear in his ruling. Such a belief, no matter how sincerely held, cannot justify harming another person, let alone taking a life, he stated firmly. He rejected Magali's claim of being coerced, saying her behavior could only be understood if she too shared Bikubi's beliefs. Eric Bikubi received a life sentence with no possibility of parole for at least 30 years. Magali Bamu got a life term with a minimum of 25 years. The trial was so deeply disturbing and profoundly distressing that Judge Paget made the rare decision to permanently excuse the jury members from future jury service for life. "This is a case we will all carry with us," he told them. In a statement outside the courthouse, the Bamu family expressed their profound grief. "We will always remember, but to rebuild our lives, we must find it in our hearts to forgive," they said. The verdicts bring us no comfort. We have lost a beloved son, daughter, and brother-in-law. Christy died in horrific circumstances caused by those he loved and trusted, people we all held dear. Their words reflected their remarkable dignity in the face of unspeakable tragedy. The death of Christy Bama was a brutal, senseless crime that exposed the frightening intersection of mental illness, cultural beliefs, and domestic violence. It served as a sobering reminder that remnants of ancient convictions can persist even in modern societies, leading to catastrophic results. For a 15-year-old boy who had traveled to London expecting a joyful Christmas, what should have been a time of celebration became his final, agonizing ordeal. A family visit warped into an unthinkable horror from which he would never escape. Story 2. On the evening of April 19th, 2023, darkness settled over the high terrain of Colorado like a star-filled blanket across the sprawling suburbs west of Denver. Headlights cut solitary paths through the crisp spring air. For Alexa Bartel, just 20 years old, the road ahead was familiar territory. She sat behind the wheel of her bright yellow Chevrolet Spark, a car as vibrant and full of life as she was, traveling north on Indiana Street, a road that runs alongside the vast, quiet expanse of the Rocky Flats National Wildlife Refuge. She was heading home to Arvada after spending time with a friend. The comfort of home was just a short drive away. Soft light from her phone illuminated her face as she talked with her girlfriend, Jenna Griggs. Their conversation created a small bubble of warmth and connection in the isolated stillness of the drive. The exchange flowed easily, the way it does between two people who understand each other's rhythms. It was just after 10:40 p.m. Alexa Bartel had a special brightness about her, a warm, caring energy, and an instinct for kindness. She was the type who always held doors open for strangers, encouraged her mother to help those in need, and said prayers for people she'd never met. She was a daughter, a niece, a friend, a chosen son to those who loved her most. In that moment, driving through the darkness, her life felt full of possibility. The future stretched out like endless open road. Meanwhile, another vehicle cruised those same shadowy streets, a gray Chevrolet Silverado. Inside were three young men, each just 18 years old, looking for trouble. Joseph Koenig sat at the wheel, with his close friend Nicholas Mitch Karolchik beside him, and a newer acquaintance, Zachary Kwak, in the back seat. Earlier that evening, they'd stopped at a Walmart and filled the truck bed with large, heavy landscaping rocks, the kind meant for garden beds and retaining walls, not for the dark purpose they had in mind. A fourth friend who'd been with them initially felt uneasy as the rocks were loaded. When he asked what they were for, he didn't get a straight answer. He asked to be taken home, a decision that would spare him from witnessing the horror to come. The Silverado became a weapon of random violence. They began their rampage around 10:00 p.m. in Westminster, targeting vehicles with a casual cruelty that was both shocking and senseless. Their method was brutally simple. Koenig would speed toward an unsuspecting oncoming car. Then one or more of them would hurl a rock shot put style from the window, a dense projectile aimed at another human being encased in metal and glass. Eleanor Davis, Nathan Tipton, and Brian Smith all had their evenings shattered by the sudden explosion of their windshields. A terrifying, incomprehensible attack that left them shaken and confused. They counted themselves lucky. They survived. As Alexa Bartel talked on her phone, her yellow car came into the Silverado's sights. Koenig accelerated. From beside the driver's window, an arm swung out into the rushing night air. A 9-pound rock, a chunk of earth itself, flew through the darkness and struck Alexa's windshield with devastating force. The glass didn't just crack, it exploded. The rock burst through on the driver's side and hit Alexa in the head. On the other end of the call, Jenna Griggs heard a sound, then complete silence. The line stayed open, but the voice she loved, the voice that was the soundtrack to her life, was gone. A terrible, absolute quiet took its place. Panic seized Jenna as she called out Alexa's name again and again with no response. The open line became an empty channel to unimaginable dread. Fear quickly turned to urgent action. Jenna opened the Find My iPhone app, her trembling fingers tracking Alexa's car icon on the screen. It had stopped moving. Without hesitation, she jumped into her own vehicle and raced toward that fixed location, praying for any explanation other than what her instincts already knew. Inside the Silverado, chaos mixed with adrenaline and a dawning awareness. Quack and Caro Chick heard the sickening thud of impact, saw the yellow car swerve off the road and come to rest in a nearby field. Koenig seemed thrilled, even triumphant about the direct hit. Concern flickered in the vehicle, a moment of apprehension, but selfish fear dominated. Quack later admitted uncertainty about whether his worry stemmed from self-preservation or concern for their victim. None of them reached for a phone to call for help. The fear of facing consequences outweighed the possibility that they just ended a life. What happened next revealed their profound moral emptiness. Rather than fleeing, they turned the truck around. They returned to the crash site, where Alexa Bartell lay dying. Their purpose wasn't to help, but to observe. Then someone, never definitively identified, pulled out a phone and took a picture of the destroyed Chevrolet Spark in the field. A trophy photograph, a souvenir of their night of destruction. After documenting their deed, they drove off into the night, leaving Alexa to die alone. When Jenna Griggs arrived at the scene, she found every person's worst nightmare. The bright yellow car was demolished, its windshield a gaping hole. Inside, Alexa was critically injured and unconscious. Jenna's world shattered. She made 2 desperate calls. The first was to 911. The second was to Kelly Bartell. The message she delivered to Alexa's mother is one no parent should ever hear. Your daughter's been in an accident. It's bad. You need to come now. Emergency crews descended on the quiet stretch of Indiana Street, their flashing lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. Paramedic Nicole Bergeron had worked as a first responder for 20 years, but she was utterly unprepared for what she found in the driver's seat of that yellow car. It was immediately clear that Alexa's injuries were catastrophic. Medical personnel pronounced her dead at the scene. The random act of violence had claimed its final victim. The investigation began immediately, led by the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office. This wasn't a hit and run, it was murder. Reports from other drivers targeted that night formed a terrifying timeline, a trail of terror that led directly to where Alexa Bartell's life had ended. Authorities were looking for a group of people in one vehicle involved in what would later be called a rock-throwing spree. The breakthrough came not from a witness, but from the quiet digital footprints the perpetrators had unknowingly left behind. In the aftermath of the killing, a friend and former co-worker of the 3 young men learned about Alexa's death. He'd seen them loading rocks into the Silverado and knew they were involved. He contacted Koenig and asked if he knew anything about what happened. This information, combined with additional tips, pointed investigators toward Koenig, Caro Chick, and Quack as suspects. Jefferson County detectives obtained warrants for the teenagers' cell phone records. The evidence was damning. Their devices placed them at every rock-throwing incident, creating a digital map of their destructive path through Jefferson and Boulder counties. Most chilling of all, their phones showed they'd traveled back toward the fatal crash site after the attack, supporting the story that they'd returned to view their destruction firsthand. About 1 week after Alexa's murder, all 3 were arrested and charged with first-degree murder showing extreme indifference to human life, plus multiple other charges related to the additional assaults. The community, which had been gripped by fear over these random attacks, could finally breathe a slight sigh of relief. The attackers who had turned their streets into a danger zone were in custody. The legal proceedings that followed stretched over 2 agonizing years, forcing Alexa Bartell's family to relive the trauma of her death through countless court appearances. Faced with overwhelming evidence, 2 of the defendants chose to negotiate with prosecutors. Zachary Quack, who had joined the group most recently, was first to crack, pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree assault and 1 count of attempted second-degree assault. He received a 32-year prison sentence. Next came Nicholas Mitch Carol Chick, Joseph Koenig's longtime friend, whose plea deal was more complex. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder with a violent crime enhancement, under the condition that he testify truthfully at co-defendant Joseph Koenig's trial. This cooperation earned him a reduced but still substantial sentence, totaling 45 years behind bars. That left Joseph Koenig, identified by prosecutors as both the driver and the person who threw the fatal rock, who pleaded not guilty, sending his case to trial on April 25, nearly 2 full years after Alexa's death. The packed Jefferson County courtroom became the stage for an emotionally exhausting experience for everyone present. Koenig's defense team didn't dispute that he was there that night. They couldn't. The evidence was ironclad. Instead, they argued he was only guilty of manslaughter, not deliberate murder. According to defense attorney Thomas Ward, in their minds, they weren't aiming at people. They were aiming at cars, he told the jury. They also tried to cast doubt on who actually threw the fatal rock, pointing to early police interviews where Carol Chick had lied to protect his friend and blamed Quack. The trial became a somber theater of betrayal and finger-pointing. Both Quack and Carol Chick appeared as witnesses against their former friend. Their testimonies painted a damning picture of the night of April 19th, 2023. In a dramatic reversal, Carol Chick told the jury he'd lied in his initial statements to protect Koenig. He testified under oath that Koenig had convinced him to blame Quack, someone he barely knew. Joe said, "We're not going to have any problems because we'll just say Zach did it." Carol Chick recounted to the court. He then looked at the jury and confirmed that it was Joseph Koenig who threw the rock that killed Alexa Bartell. For Alexa's family, the trial was deeply painful. Her mother, Kelly, attended court daily wearing a blue ribbon attached to an angel pin, a small tribute to her daughter, who had become her guardian angel. She testified about the last time she saw Alexa, how they'd said their usual "I love yous," but something had prompted her to hug her daughter one more time and tell her to be safe. Jenna Griggs testified about the terror of being on the phone with Alexa, hearing the line go silent, then finding her in the destroyed car. After a week of emotionally draining testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than a day. On April 25th, 2025, the verdict was announced. Joseph Koenig was found guilty on all charges, including first-degree murder. Outside the courthouse, Kelly Bartell said through her tears, "It's hard to feel any joy or happiness that justice was served today, because one amazing life is gone, and 3 other lives are also ruined and affected. And I don't want to celebrate that, but I do believe justice was served." On June 3rd, 2025, Joseph Koenig returned to court for sentencing. In Colorado, a first-degree murder conviction carries a mandatory sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Before the formal sentencing, Koenig, dressed in a sweater and slacks, stood and addressed the court and Alexa's family. "I have no excuse and no explanation for what Mitch, Zach, and I did that night," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I hope you believe me when I say we didn't intend to hurt Alexa or anyone. Looking back on it now, it seems obvious that someone would get hurt or killed." His expression of remorse rang hollow given the destruction he'd caused. Kelly Bartell described her transformed life in a victim impact statement that left the courtroom silent. "That night was every parent's worst nightmare, and it didn't just change my life, it changed who I am," she said. "Losing my daughter didn't just break my heart, it destroyed me. It shattered my soul. Everything I see and experience is now different." Judge Christopher Zenk, in handing down the sentence, acknowledged the profound impact of Alexa's life, even on those who only learned of her through her tragic death. He then sentenced Koenig to the mandatory life term without parole for the murder and added another 60 years for additional crimes, to be served consecutively. The legal process was complete. 3 young men who had traded their futures for brief moments of reckless, destructive excitement were imprisoned for decades, one for his entire life. But for Alexa Bartel's family, there is no closure. There is only life before and life after. The world lost a bright light, a vibrant spirit snuffed out by a rock thrown from darkness. In the time since her death, her family has worked to reclaim the tragedy site, hoping to transform a place of horror into one of beauty. They've scattered wildflower seeds along the roadside where her life ended, hoping to create a living memorial. Story 3. In the spring of 2012, the historic city of Regensburg, with its elegant stone bridge spanning the Danube, was filled with the anticipation of new beginnings. For Maria Baumer, life was a vivid canvas of bright colors. At 26 years old, she was thriving, a dynamic presence, driven by a strong sense of purpose and a bright, magnetic energy. She was close to completing her master's in geography, a discipline that combined her sharp mind with a love for the intricate patterns of the natural world. But her passion extended beyond her studies. She had recently been elected as the state chairwoman for Bavaria's Catholic Rural Youth Organization, KLHEB, a role that embodied her essence, a blend of faith, community, and a deep desire to make a difference. She was an organizer, a leader, a woman who moved through life with a quiet confidence that drew others to her. Her life was deeply intertwined with her twin sister Barbara's, a bond rooted in their shared birth, and strengthened by years of private conversations and intuitive understanding. And at the center of her personal world was Christian F., her fiancé. A nurse by profession, he was the man she planned to marry, the person with whom she envisioned building her future. To Maria's close-knit family, he was more than just a prospective relative. He was a fixture, a reliable presence at family gatherings, someone they were convinced loved and valued their daughter. They lived together in a shared apartment in Regensburg. Their daily life was a harmonious blend of work, study, and shared dreams. Maria was the outgoing social half, the rising star, while Christian was seen as the steady, supportive partner beside her. But beneath the calm surface of their shared life, a dark and creeping undercurrent was building, a tide of jealousy and resentment that would soon consume Maria completely. The Pentecost weekend in May 2012 arrived, bringing with it a sense of celebration and rest. On the evening of Friday, May 25th, Maria was in her element, leading a KLJB meeting. She was organized and focused, her mind already turning to preparations for an upcoming trip to Hamburg. After the meeting, she and Christian returned to their apartment. The last evidence of her online presence was a Facebook message sent late that evening. The next morning, Saturday, May 26th, Maria Baumer vanished without a trace. The initial story, carefully crafted and spread by Christian F., didn't raise alarms, but rather expressed weary concern. He told Maria's worried family that she'd simply left. She was under stress, he explained, overwhelmed by the demands of her master's thesis and her demanding responsibilities with the KLJB. She needed a break, a respite from everything. He claimed she'd contacted him twice that Saturday, first to say she was in Nuremberg, and later to announce she was traveling to Hamburg to think things through. It was a plausible story, convincing enough to temporarily calm fears. Maria was a strong, independent woman. Perhaps she genuinely needed time alone. But as days stretched into a week, unease mounted. It was completely out of character for Maria to sever all contact, especially with her twin Barbara. The family's anxiety began souring into gnawing dread. Meanwhile, Christian amplified his performance as the troubled fiancé. He organized search parties, distributed flyers bearing Maria's cheerful image, and spoke with regional news outlets, his tone infused with what seemed like genuine hope mixed with despair. He was playing the part of an anguished, grieving man, and he played it superbly. The deception reached its horrifying climax in August 2012, 3 months after Maria's disappearance. Christian F. appeared on a television program, seated in the studio under bright lights. He looked straight into the camera and pleaded with the nation for help. He talked about Maria's plans, her alleged stress, and the strange, disturbing silence. "I just want to know what's happening," he said. His portrayal of confusion was completely convincing. This story was an absolute lie. The man begging for his fiancée's safe return had almost certainly buried her in an unmarked grave long before. For over 12 months, the family endured agonizing uncertainty, trapped between hope and the terrible unspoken possibility that Maria wouldn't return. Christian F. remained a constant presence, a predator in disguise who attended their memorials and comforted them in their grief, all while hiding his hideous truth. On a cool day in September 2013, in a dense forest called Kreuzler Forst near Bergel-Innenfeld, just outside Regensburg, someone was hunting for mushrooms. While navigating through damp undergrowth, his eyes caught something unusual, an area of disturbed soil. Curiosity piqued. He approached closer. What he uncovered would end the search for Maria Baumer in a macabre and conclusive way. Partially buried in the forest ground were the skeletal remains of a human body. Authorities were called and the site was carefully excavated. The body was severely decomposed, not just from the passage of time, but because a corrosive chemical had been deliberately poured over it to break down the flesh and erase any evidence of identity. But the killer's efforts weren't entirely successful. Near the skeletal remains, detectives found a crucial piece of evidence, a shovel. Shortly after, dental records confirmed the devastating truth. The remains were those of Maria Baumer. The torment of not knowing had ended, replaced by the harsh, grim certainty of murder. The discovery of the body and the shovel immediately turned intense suspicion toward Christian F. What had been a missing persons investigation was now reclassified as a murder probe. Authorities began examining Christian's background, discovering he was far from the devoted fiancé he'd portrayed himself to be. Just 3 days before Maria's disappearance, on May 23, 2012, Christian F. had used his bank card to purchase a woman's garden shovel from a local hardware store for €17.95. The receipt was damning evidence, directly linking him to the tool found beside Maria's body. In October 2013, Christian F. was arrested on suspicion of manslaughter. He remained in custody for 6 weeks, but the evidence, while highly suggestive, wasn't enough at that time to support a murder charge. The severe decomposition of Maria's body prevented the medical examiner from determining an exact cause of death. Without that critical information, and without a confession, prosecutors were relying on circumstantial evidence they worried might not hold up in court. Disappointingly, Christian F. was released from custody, and the investigation stalled. The following years brought disturbing revelations. While the murder investigation stagnated, Christian F.'s carefully crafted image began to crumble due to other unrelated crimes. In 2018, he went on trial for terrible acts of abuse committed years earlier when he was a boarding school student. He had molested 2 young boys, aged 11 and 13. He was convicted of these crimes and received a 2-year suspended sentence. For the Baumer family who attended the trial, the verdict was a sickening revelation. The man they'd welcomed into their home, whom they'd trusted with their daughter's love, was revealed as a liar, an abuser, and a convicted child molester. His mask hadn't just slipped, it had been ripped away, exposing a monster hidden in plain sight. The trust they'd placed in him for so long had been a catastrophic error in judgment. A more daunting and frightening question now emerged. If he was capable of such wickedness, what other horrors had he committed? Nevertheless, the murder case remained stuck. But investigators are nothing if not persistent, and scientific progress never stops. In the years following Maria's discovery, Forensic science had advanced dramatically. In late 2019, driven by a determination to secure justice for Maria, at last, prosecutors decided to re-examine the evidence using these new methods. They sent the clothing Maria had been wearing when she was found, along with other preserved samples, to a specialized laboratory. This time, researchers found what they were looking for. Using sophisticated analytical techniques, they discovered traces of two powerful medications in the samples: lorazepam, a potent sedative, and tramadol, a strong opioid painkiller. Together and in high doses, these drugs are lethal and can cause respiratory failure. This was incontrovertible proof. It was no longer speculation but established scientific fact. Maria Baumer had been poisoned. In a striking courtroom development, he conceded to certain aspects of his deceit. He acknowledged that his claim of Maria having fled was false. He alleged that she'd taken the drugs voluntarily in a suicide attempt, and that he'd found her already dead. In a panic, he said, worried he'd be blamed, he buried her body in the forest. This was a frantic attempt to explain away the evidence and portray himself as a frightened, grieving person rather than a calculating killer. The most powerful and emotionally devastating testimony came from Maria's twin sister, Barbara Fuchs. She testified and described the initial confusion as the family first believed Christian's explanation about Maria needing a break. She painted a picture of the slow, painful realization that something terrible had happened, and the profound sense of betrayal upon discovering the true nature of the man they'd welcomed as one of their own. On October 6th, 2020, the court announced its decision. Died always. The judges rejected Christian F.'s last-minute story of suicide and panic. They convicted him of murder. In his statement, the presiding judge described the crime as deceitful and driven by base motives. Christian F. received a life imprisonment sentence. Additionally, the court recognized the exceptional gravity of his guilt, a designation under German law that severely restricts his eligibility for parole after 15 years, practically guaranteeing he'll remain incarcerated for most, if not all, of his life. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served. The Maria Baumer case is a heartbreaking story of the ultimate betrayal by a man who killed his fiancée and then performed his grief publicly on television. It's a testament to a family's resilience through an unimaginable ordeal and a powerful illustration of the relentless pursuit of truth, where science's silent witness ultimately proved more convincing than all the perpetrators' lies. The darkness that had engulfed the Baumer family for so long was finally dispelled by clarity, and the man who thought he'd executed a flawless crime was revealed as just an ordinary murderer, betrayed by his own digital traces and a tiny but enduring chemical residue on a piece of clothing hidden in a forest. Story 4. The bitter winds of a late January day swept across the grounds of Virginia Tech, heralding the approaching turmoil. It was January 21st, 2009, a date that would remain forever etched in the university's collective memory, not because of the frigid weather, but because of the horrifying act of violence that shattered the peace of this academic sanctuary. Inside the gentle hum of the Au Bon Pain Café, a cozy spot filled with friendly conversation, a romance that had begun in the vibrant city of Shanghai and grown within academic corridors was approaching its violent and sorrowful end. This is the story of Zhen Yang, a lively and gifted young scholar, and the man who, in a final desperate gesture of possession, ended her life. Xin Yang shone with intelligence and kindness. At 22 years old, she'd achieved more than most accomplish in a lifetime. Her journey from Beijing to Virginia Tech highlighted her drive and intellectual sharpness. She was pursuing graduate studies in accounting, a discipline that matched her keen and logical mind. Beyond her academic accomplishments, Jean was known for her compassion, her captivating smile, and her giving nature. She was a treasured member of the university's international student community, a friend to many, and a daughter deeply loved by her family in China. Her prospects were limitless, a future ready to be painted with the bright colors of achievement and joy. The counterpart in this narrative, the architect of its heartbreaking finale, was Haiyang Zhu. He also attended Virginia Tech as a doctoral student in agricultural and applied economics. Like Xin, he came from China, a young man who traveled abroad, seeking education and opportunity. Friends described him as quiet, introverted, and deeply focused on his academic work. By all accounts, he was an excellent student with a bright future in academia ahead. But beneath his studious exterior raged an inner turmoil, a storm of obsession and control that would eventually overwhelm him and the woman he claimed to love. Their paths crossed in Shanghai, a city pulsing with energy and romantic possibility. There their relationship began, a bond that outwardly appeared to be one of mutual affection and shared aspirations. When both ended up at Virginia Tech, it probably felt like destiny, a continuation of their shared journey in an unfamiliar and exciting environment. They belonged to a close group of Chinese students, a network that helped them cope with the challenges of living abroad. They ate together, celebrated holidays, and supported one another in their academic endeavors. But as often happens in such stories, the perfect image shown to others was misleading. In private, their relationship was beginning to fracture. The details of their personal conflicts are theirs alone. But what has emerged is a picture of a strained partnership, a love turning sour into something darker and more dangerous. Jin seemed to be distancing herself, wanting to pursue a life separate from Zhu. She was a young woman on the threshold of an outstanding future, unafraid to carve her own path. For Zhu, though, this move toward independence wasn't seen as natural growth, but as a threat. His love appeared not as the selfless care of a partner, but as the controlling grip of someone unable to accept loss of dominance. He grew more controlling and insistent, his quiet intensity warping into a threatening obsession. Reports indicate he began tracking Jin's movements, questioning her friendships, and isolating her from the very network that had once been their shared refuge. Warning signs were present, subtle at first but intensifying over time. Friends noticed changes in Xin. The spirited, sociable woman became more withdrawn, her radiant smile appearing less often. She confided to some that she feared Zhu's behavior was becoming more erratic and alarming. She tried to end the relationship, to create distance, but he refused to let her go. The days before January 21st were charged with tension. Xin had decided firmly to leave, to cut ties with someone who no longer offered love and support, but instilled fear and unease. She sought help from friends and university resources, a desperate attempt to find safety in circumstances spiraling out of control. On that fateful Wednesday afternoon, Xin and Zhu met at the Peng Cafe in the Graduate Life Center, a public place where Xin may have felt protected, a setting where their escalating conflict could perhaps be addressed calmly. She'd come to return the engagement ring, a definitive symbolic step toward ending things. What followed remains a hazy memory of shock and horror. The gentle murmur of the cafe was suddenly broken by a scream, a cry of pure terror that cut through the ordinary hum of a typical afternoon. Patrons turned to witness an act of unspeakable brutality. Haiyang Zhu, the quiet and gifted PhD candidate, had pulled out a knife. In a fit of rage and desperation, he attacked Xin, the woman he'd once claimed to love. It was a savage and merciless assault. Zhu stabbed and slashed Xin repeatedly, his face twisted with fury. There was no pause, no flicker of hesitation, just a relentless determination to destroy the woman who'd chosen to walk away. The other cafe patrons, frozen by disbelief and fear, could only watch as the tragedy unfolded. When police arrived, they found a scene of devastation. Xin Yang lay on the ground, her life bleeding out onto the cafe's cold floor tiles. Haiyang Zhu, stood over her, the weapon still gripped in his hand, his clothes stained with her blood. He offered no resistance. He appeared calm, almost tranquil, as though the violent act had granted him an eerie peace, a perverse closure to the inner chaos that had consumed him. Xinyan was rushed to the hospital, but her wounds were too severe. She was pronounced dead, her promising future snuffed out in a moment of senseless brutality. Hai Yangzhu was arrested. His academic pursuits, his prospects, his life, all were reduced to the one terrible deed he'd just committed. The news of the killing rippled through the Virginia Tech community like an earthquake. It struck a campus still healing from the wounds of the 2007 massacre, a community that had worked hard to rebuild its sense of safety. The murder of Xinyan was a harsh reminder that violence can erupt where least expected, that the darker impulses of humanity can infiltrate even the hallowed halls of higher learning. The international student community, especially those from China, were devastated. Xinyan was one of them, a friend, a sister figure, a symbol of the dreams that brought them all to this foreign land. Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy, but a collective wound, a void felt by all who knew her and countless others who didn't. In the days that followed, the university community came together in grief. A candlelight vigil was held, a wordless tribute to a life cut short. Friends and teachers shared stories of Jin's intelligence, her kindness, her vibrant energy. They remembered her laughter, her passion for learning, the joy she brought to those around her. It was a poignant and moving tribute to the mark she'd left during her brief time at Virginia Tech. The legal process that followed was straightforward. Hai Yangzhu admitted to the killing. His guilt was never in question. He faced charges of first-degree murder, a classification reflecting the premeditated and vicious nature of his crime. He pleaded guilty, sparing both families the ordeal of a prolonged public trial. In court, the full sad story of Xinyan's final moments emerged. Friends testified about her fear and desperate efforts to escape from Zhu's suffocating obsession. Emails and text messages were submitted as evidence, a digital trail documenting the mounting tension and escalating fear. It told the story of a woman trapped, one who'd tried every means to protect herself, but ultimately couldn't withstand the violent explosion from a man unwilling to release her. Hai Yangzhu received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. While delivering this judgment, the judge addressed the profound and senseless loss of young potential and the destruction caused by an act driven by selfish possession. Zhu himself remained subdued and enigmatic. His reasons, his thoughts, his regret, all hidden behind an impenetrable silence. The story of Xinyan is undeniably tragic. It recounts a life full of potential, one enriched by love, joy, and ambition, one stolen away in an episode of cruel and pointless violence. It tells of love's dark side, how passion can sour into possession, how affection can warp into a craving for dominance. Yet it equally tells of a community's strength, the ability to come together in grief, to mourn, to heal, and to honor. Xinyang's legacy endures at Virginia Tech, in the hearts of friends, the memories of professors, and the campus corners she once walked. Her story stands as a warning, highlighting domestic abuse dangers, stressing vigilance for red flags, and urging aid for those caught in harmful relationships. The winds still sweep cold over Virginia Tech's grounds, but for those remembering January 21st, 2009, they carry grief's weight, an echo of what once lived yet never came to pass. Xinyang's chronicle is both sorrowful and significant, a tale that needs sharing not to dramatize her death, but to celebrate her life and to ensure that the lessons from her tragedy remain forever remembered. Ultimately, it's a story that underscores life's fragility, the value of each moment, and the lasting strength of a community to find hope amid the darkest times. Story 5. The pale winter sun cast long skeletal shadows across the rural property, Incarnation, Washington. It was December 24th, 2007, a day meant for warmth, family, and holiday cheer. For the Anderson family, this was a cherished tradition, a time to gather at the home of Wayne and Judy, the beloved patriarch and matriarch. The air should have been rich with the scent of pine and roasting turkey, the sound of laughter and children's eager whispers. Instead, a different kind of silence was descending on the property, a cold and oppressive quiet, heavy with a terror that was about to be unleashed. Michelle Shea Anderson, the youngest daughter in the family at 29 years old, was a whirlwind of resentment and perceived slights. For years, a deep-seated bitterness had been festering inside her, a toxic brew of jealousy, entitlement, and an acute sense of victimhood. She saw herself as the perpetually wrong party, forever overlooked and cheated by those who should have loved her most. Her anger was a constant low burn, and on this Christmas Eve, it was about to erupt into an inferno that would consume her entire family. Her boyfriend, Joseph McEnroe, was a man without direction. He was a follower, someone with a weak sense of self who'd found a dangerous stability in Michelle's controlling presence. He was, as his own defense attorney later described him, susceptible to her influence. A tool in the deadly plan she'd devised. The two lived together in a trailer on her parents' property, a life of apparent dependence that only fueled Michelle's rage. Both were unemployed, living rent-free, yet Michelle believed the world, and especially her family, owed her something she was determined to collect. The seeds of the massacre were planted in ordinary family disputes, nurtured by Michelle's particular venom. She was convinced her older brother Scott owed her $40,000, a sum she insisted he'd failed to repay. She was furious that her parents, Wayne and Judy, had sided with him in the disagreement, and she was incensed that they'd recently insisted she and McEnroe start paying rent for the mobile home, a demand that, in her twisted logic, represented the ultimate act of betrayal. For 2 weeks, Michelle had been carefully planning her revenge, a brutal and permanent solution to the grievances that dominated her thoughts. On that fateful Christmas Eve day, the plan was set in motion. Michelle and McEnroe armed themselves with guns and walked a short path from their trailer to her parents' house. They weren't carrying gifts or holiday greetings. They were messengers of death. Inside the house was a scene of domestic peace. Judy, known for her warmth and generosity, was wrapping Christmas presents, her hands busy with the happy task of preparing for the family celebration. Wayne was relaxing, enjoying the quiet moments before the festive rush would begin. The attack was sudden and shockingly swift. McEnroe followed Michelle's instructions, creating a distraction while she aimed a gun at her father. But her weapon jammed. The sound of the misfire was a brief, aborted pop in the quiet room. But McEnroe didn't hesitate. He immediately stepped in, firing his own weapon and fatally shooting Wayne as he sat. Judy's screams of horror were quickly silenced when McEnroe turned the gun on her, taking her life as she watched her husband's murder. The festive home had been turned into a slaughterhouse. But the carnage wasn't finished. With eerie composure, Michelle and McEnroe set about eliminating the traces of their monstrous deed. They dragged her parents' bodies outside, hiding them from view. They meticulously cleaned the blood from inside the house, erasing the physical signs of their crime even as its moral stain seeped deeper into their souls. And then they waited. They waited for Scott, the brother Michelle so despised, to arrive with his family for the Christmas Eve gathering. Scott and his wife Erica, both 32 years old, drove up to the house with their 2 young children, 5-year-old Olivia and 3-year-old Nathan. They were the picture of a happy young family, their car ringing with children's innocent chatter, still enchanted by Christmas magic. They walked inside, completely unaware they were stepping into their doom. Once indoors, Michelle fired multiple rounds at her brother, riddling him with bullets. the person she blamed for all her life's disappointments. McEnroe, alongside Anderson, then turned their firearms on Erica. Wounded and terrified, Erica's maternal instincts surged. She managed to reach a cordless phone and dial 911. Her frantic attempt to save her loved ones, a desperate, fleeting plea in the encroaching darkness. The call connected briefly. The operator heard what sounded like arguing at a party before the line went dead. McEnroe wrestled the phone away, ripping out its batteries and smashing it against the floor, severing that last fragile connection to the outside world. He then fired the fatal shot at Erica, her body collapsing to the ground as her life faded. What happened next reveals the absolute depths of human evil. Olivia and Nathan, having witnessed the savage killing of their parents, were now the only survivors. Michele, in an act of unimaginable cruelty, ordered their execution to eliminate any witnesses. She argued the children would be permanently traumatized by what they'd seen, a twisted and self-serving justification for murdering the innocent. McEnroe, ever the compliant partner, carried out the order. He fired his weapon and ended the life of 5-year-old Olivia. The last person alive in that house of horror was 3-year-old Nathan. The little boy, who'd recently celebrated his 3rd birthday, had picked up the batteries McEnroe had torn from the phone and was holding them in his small hand. McEnroe later told investigators the child looked at him with total understanding, as if he fully grasped what was happening. In that final heartbreaking moment, the little one seemed to comprehend the terrible finality unfolding. McEnroe then shot him in the head. Law enforcement had been dispatched to the property following Erica's 911 call, but their investigation was cursory. They found the entrance to the property locked. A gate Michelle had quickly closed after learning Erica's call had connected. Seeing nothing unusual from the road, they left. The opportunity to prevent the final, most agonizing part of the tragedy slipped away. For 2 days, the 6 bodies remained in the silent home, mute witnesses to the horrific violence that had occurred on Christmas Eve. The wider community was oblivious. The gifts Judy had lovingly wrapped remained unopened. The holiday meal she'd planned to cook was never made. The Christmas lights adorning the house blinked in the winter darkness, a grim and ironic contrast to the scene inside. The discovery came on December 26th by a co-worker of Judy's who became worried when Judy, known for her punctuality, didn't show up for work. Entering the home, she was met with a sight of indescribable terror. Blood was splattered across the white holiday carpet, a jarring stain on the cheerful decorations. The bodies of Scott, Erica, and their 2 children were in the living room. Their lives violently ended in what should have been a place of safety and love. The bodies of Wayne and Judy were found later, hidden in an outbuilding on the property. When officers arrived at the scene, they cordoned off the area, their flashing lights a harsh intrusion on the rural quiet. It was then that Michelle Anderson and Joseph McEnroe approached with shocking boldness. Their pretended concern quickly dissolved under police suspicion. Michelle seemed strangely detached, never once asking about her family's condition. Detectives took them in for questioning, and soon their carefully constructed facade of innocence crumbled. Michelle broke down emotionally. Her confession poured out as a torrent of self-pity and blame. "I wanted my mom, brother, and Dad dead because they mistreated me for years," she told detectives. A self-justifying narrative that cast her as a victim while admitting to orchestrating a massacre. She called herself a monster, a brief moment of clarity, soon overwhelmed by her litany of grievances. She admitted to planning the killings for 2 weeks, her fury over money driving her heinous act. The subsequent legal proceedings were lengthy and exhausting, exposing Michelle's premeditated malice in full detail. Joseph McEnroe went to trial first. His legal team argued he was merely a tool in Michelle's deadly scheme, a man with an unstable personality coerced into performing atrocious acts. The jury found him guilty of murder but chose against the death penalty, a verdict that would influence Michelle's trial outcome. Michelle's court case exemplified cold indifference. She showed no emotion as explicit accounts of her crimes were presented in court. Her lack of engagement stood in sharp contrast to the victim's family's deep sorrow. Her sister Mary Reed testified that Michelle had previously threatened to kill their parents, but was never taken seriously. "Who imagines family will kill family?" she asked, her words poignantly capturing the disbelief that had allowed Michelle's rage to grow unchecked. Erica's mother, Pam Mantle, who lost her daughter, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren in one horrific night, spoke of the endless pain from her loss. "They talk about greed and money as motives, but there must be more than that. I mean, killing 6 people," she said, her words resonating with questions that plagued all who observed the case. The prosecution clearly depicted greed as Michelle's motive for these crimes. They explained how she'd referenced money over 35 times in her confession, her fixation on the imagined debt, and her resentment about being asked to pay rent the primary motivations for the killings. The jury convicted Michelle A. Anderson on 6 counts of aggravated first-degree murder. Because the defense had already removed capital punishment as an option after McEnroe's verdict, the decision resulted in a mandatory life sentence without the possibility of release. During her sentencing hearing, Michelle stayed quiet but wept when friends and community members described the devastating consequences of her actions. But for the families of those she killed, her tears provided no comfort. Pam Mantle, in a powerful statement on behalf of the victims, called Michelle a bully and a coward, words that echoed the premeditated brutality of her crimes. Michelle A. Anderson received 6 consecutive life sentences, 1 for each life she'd so viciously ended. She will remain imprisoned for all her remaining years, confined by the same bitterness and rage that drove her to commit one of Washington state's most gruesome family massacres. The Carnation killings serve as a stark warning about the destructive power of unchecked anger and the fragile nature of family bonds. They stand as proof that evil can wear a familiar face, that the deepest betrayals may come from those we expect to love us most. On a day that should have been filled with joy and love, Michelle Anderson chose darkness and death, creating a trail of destruction that can never be undone. 3 generations of family were wiped out in one night, their futures stolen, their lives reduced to a tragic news story, and a cautionary tale about the monster that can dwell inside a human heart. Story 6. On October 15, 2011, the air in Noonan, Georgia buzzed with the unique energy only a high school homecoming dance can create. It was a crisp fall night, the kind where winter's approach is just a faint whisper on the wind. For the students of East Coweta High School, life felt intimate and contained, a world of corsages, awkward slow dances, and the thrilling freedom of a Saturday night. In their midst stood Blake Tyler Chappelle, a 17-year-old who, by all accounts, was someone who made an impression. He wasn't just another face in the crowded gym. He was vibrant, an exceptional young man with prospects that seemed as bright and boundless as the starry Georgia sky. That night, Blake was caught up in the rituals of adolescence. He went with his girlfriend, swept up in the rhythm of the music and the laughter of his friends. The homecoming dance was a pinnacle of the high school experience, an evening meant to be remembered, captured in yearbooks, and retold in hallways for days to come. As the final song ended and lights brightened the room, the magic of the night began to fade, spilling out into the cold, dark outside. The night wasn't over. Not for Blake. The plan was simple, a typical teenage agenda. After the dance, he intended to walk from his girlfriend's house on Mary Freeman Road to a friend's home in the sprawling, picturesque Summer Grove subdivision. It was a walk he'd likely made before, a short passage through a neighborhood designed to feel safe, with its manicured lawns and quiet, winding streets. It was in the hazy early hours of October 16th that the smooth fabric of the night began to tear. As Blake started his walk, his cell phone was his only companion, a small beacon in the darkness connecting him to the world he was about to leave forever. He texted his girlfriend a casual message that would later become an eerie and mysterious clue. A police officer had stopped him, he typed. It was an odd detail, but not necessarily alarming. In a small town, late-night encounters with police weren't common. But in the days and weeks ahead, when investigators would meticulously retrace every step of that evening, they'd find no officer from any nearby department had logged such an encounter. The message was a ghost, an event that apparently never happened. Still, it was one of Blake's final communications. Moments later, another text arrived on his girlfriend's phone. This one was more ordinary, more concrete. It was about the cold. The fall air, which had been bracing earlier, had deepened into a sharper chill. It was a plain observation, the kind of fleeting thought someone might have during a solitary walk. It was also the last message anyone would ever receive from Blake Chappelle. After that text came only silence. At his friend's house, time passed slowly. The expectation of a familiar knock on the door gradually soured into confusion, then into a quiet, persistent anxiety. When daylight broke on Sunday morning, stretching long shadows over Summer Grove's empty streets, apprehension had swelled into full alarm. Blake hadn't arrived. He wasn't at his friend's house. He wasn't at his own home. He had simply vanished. His mother, Melissa, was plunged into a nightmare from which she wouldn't emerge for over 10 years. The first hours were a whirlwind of frantic calls, each unanswered ring deepening her dread. Police were notified. A missing person case was opened. Initially, the official response was measured. It wasn't unusual for teenagers to rebel, to spend a night away without permission. The situation was first treated as that of a runaway youth, possibly someone who'd fled. But Melissa knew her son. This didn't fit his character. The young man who lit up parties, who wore an easy smile, wasn't someone who would run away. The gnawing terror inside her said something was gravely wrong. Days stretched into a week. Noonan's vibrant autumn leaves began falling, covering the town in shades of gold and crimson. A beautiful counterpoint to the grim events unfolding. The community rallied, as neighborhoods often do during crises. Posters bearing Blake's cheerful face were printed and posted on every utility pole and storefront. His picture became an ever-present ghostly reminder of the teenager who disappeared into darkness. Volunteer groups searched woods and residential areas, their hopeful calls of his name echoing unanswered through the trees. Each day that passed without news or trace diminished what had once been strong hope. The investigation simultaneously hit repeated roadblocks. Investigators questioned his friends, his girlfriend, everyone who'd seen him at the homecoming dance. They rewalked his intended route, a simple, direct path that had inexplicably become a road to nowhere. They searched for his belongings, his wallet, his keys, his phone. But it was as if Blake and everything he carried had been erased from existence. The story about the police officer remained a puzzling mystery. Could it have been a lie, a misunderstanding, or a crucial clue, pointing to an encounter with someone posing as an officer? Without Blake, answers were absent too, leaving only questions that multiplied with each passing hour. The search continued, driven by a mother's unwavering love and a town's refusal to give up. But as October turned into November and the chill in the air sharpened into winter's early sting, a grim realization began to settle. The mission was no longer about finding a missing teenager. It had become a search for remains. The discovery came on December 18, 2011, 2 months after Blake's disappearance. The location was painfully close to his last known whereabouts, in a small, unassuming creek that wound through the very Summer Grove neighborhood he'd been walking toward. A resident made a heartbreaking find. There in the shallow, frigid water lay a body. It was Blake. The scene was bleak and horrifying. He was found face down, wearing only his underwear and an undershirt, stripped of his clothes and his dignity. The initial mystery surrounding his disappearance had evaporated, replaced by the harsh reality of foul play. An autopsy would confirm what investigators already suspected. This was not an accident. Blake Chappelle had been murdered. His death was caused by a single gunshot wound to the head. The investigation's designation shifted instantly from missing person to homicide. The announcement sent shockwaves through Noonan. The fear that had been a faint background hum in daily life now escalated into a roar. A killer lived among them. Someone who could snatch a boy from a quiet suburban street and end his life with chilling precision. The idyllic image of Summer Grove, with its uniform homes and safe streets, was shattered beyond repair. For Blake's family, the discovery brought conflicting anguish. The excruciating uncertainty had ended, but it was replaced with the finality of grief, a pain so deep it threatened to consume them. They had their son back, but not in the way they'd prayed for. Now, they had a new, desperate desire. Justice. The murder investigation began with renewed urgency. However, the trail had already gone cold. 2 months had passed. Any potential evidence at the abduction site had been washed away by rain and the passage of time. The creek where Blake's body was found offered little evidence. His clothes, cell phone, and wallet were still missing, presumably taken by the perpetrator in an attempt to cover their tracks. The investigators faced a puzzle missing most of its pieces. They had a victim, a cause of death, and a timeline that ended abruptly with a text about the coal. They had no witnesses, no weapon, no clear motive. Years began to pass. The seasons in Noonan changed. The posters with Blake's face faded and were eventually taken down. But for his family, time stopped. For the Noonan Police Department, the Blake Chappelle case became a heavy burden, an open file on a detective's desk, a constant reminder of an unkept promise. It was the kind of investigation that haunts a precinct, a ghost in its hallways. It was officially classified as cold, but never forgotten. In the stalled investigation's darkness, a strange and cryptic element emerged. In 2011, shortly after Blake's body was recovered, the police department received an anonymous letter. It contained details about the investigation that suggested the writer had intimate knowledge of the crime, a compelling lead that might crack the wall of silence. But the writer remained nameless, a phantom whispering from the shadows. Years later, when another letter arrived, analysis revealed matching handwriting and content, leading investigators to conclude it came from the same source. Someone out there holding vital information, but choosing anonymity for unknown reasons. Were they the killer, mocking authorities? Or a witness, fearing consequences? Detectives issued direct public appeals through media channels, addressing this anonymous figure directly. "We are convinced these letters came from the same hand," said Detective Mark Gonzalez, words thrown desperately into the void, hoping the plea might persuade the informant that fear should end now, that their information could bring long overdue comfort to a grieving family. Melissa Chappelle added her own plea, laden with over 10 years of suffering, expressing faith that the writer would eventually choose to do the right thing. But the appeal yielded only more silence. The letters became yet another vexing fragment, symbolizing how close yet distant resolution remained. Years accumulated, each adding a layer of dust to the dormant file. 2012, 2015, 2020. A decade elapsed. Children born the year Blake died were now in middle school. The world moved on, but the Chappelle family and a handful of committed detectives remained steadfast. In September 2025, after nearly 14 years of profound silence, the investigation didn't just progress, it exploded. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Authorities, following a fresh lead, identified a person of interest who had completely escaped notice in the original 2011 investigation. His name was Scotty Elrod Smith, a 38-year-old with a minor criminal record from 2018, but nothing suggesting he was capable of a vicious teenage murder. Officers from the Noonan Police Department brought Smith in for questioning. The details of that interrogation remained sealed, protected by the confidentiality of an ongoing investigation. But what happened in that room changed everything. Perhaps it was the weight of a secret carried for 14 years. Perhaps it was the skill of investigators who'd been consumed by this case for so long. Or perhaps he was simply tired of running from the memory of the boy he'd killed. Scotty Elrod Smith confessed. He admitted to the murder of 17-year-old Blake Chappelle. The words spoken in the stark silence of that interview room were a thunderclap that ended one of the region's most painful and persistent mysteries. After 14 years of questions, theories, and dead ends, the answer now had a name. Smith was arrested and charged with a list of offenses that captured the full scope of his actions on that cold October night. Felony murder, aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, tampering with evidence, and concealing a death. He was taken to the Coweta County Jail, and for the first time in over a decade, there was a face to the nameless evil that had haunted the community of Noonan. The announcement of the arrest unleashed a wave of emotions. For the townspeople, it was a collective exhale, the settling of a deep-seated fear. For the Noonan Police Department, it was a moment of hard-won victory. In an official statement, they acknowledged the countless hours of dedication that led to this point, a quiet tribute to the detectives who refused to let Blake's case be forgotten. But for Blake's family, the feelings were far more complex. There was relief, certainly, and gratitude, but Smith's arrest didn't bring Blake back. It didn't undo the 14 years of birthdays celebrated with an empty chair, of anniversaries marked by sorrow rather than joy. It didn't fill the void carved into their hearts. They were learning that justice doesn't heal grief, it only settles a debt. As court proceedings began, many uncertainties remained. The biggest among them, why? What could have driven a grown man to end the life of a 17-year-old coming home from a dance? Was it a robbery gone wrong? A chance encounter turned violent? Or something more sinister? Police have remained tight-lipped about a potential motive, saying only that it remains under active investigation. Any connection between Scotty Smith and Blake Chappelle has not been disclosed to the public. In the end, Blake Chappelle's story is a two-part tragedy. The first part is the brutal, pointless killing of a young man on the threshold of life. The second part is the 14-year wait for answers, a testament to his family's marathon of grief and resilience, and to law enforcement's unyielding determination. Scotty Smith's arrest closes one chapter, but the book of suffering can never be fully sealed. The silence that fell after Blake's last text on that chilly October night has finally been broken by a name and a confession. But what was taken will echo forever in those who loved him. The young man with the easy smile is gone. But because a mother persisted, and police never forgot, he has finally received his justice at last. Story 7. The town of Wisbeck, nestled in the flat fenland heart of Cambridgeshire, kept its secrets close. It was a place of quiet streets and settled lives, where the rhythm of daily existence was as steady and predictable as the slow River Nen winding through its center. In a modest bungalow on Magazine Lane, on the unpretentious outskirts near Elgood's Brewery, lived Una Crown. At 86 years old, she was a relic of a gentler, more orderly time. A former postmistress who had spent her career sorting other people's mail, her own world had gradually shrunk and become isolated. Una was a woman shaped by routine and caution. Her husband, Jack, had passed away in 2009, and in the years since, the silence in her home had become a constant companion. They'd had no children, leaving no sons or daughters to fill the gaps. No grandchildren to bring bursts of joyful chaos. Her life was a carefully maintained set of small rituals. She was known to be deeply private and security conscious, someone who peered through the window before sliding back the lock on her door, a habit ingrained by years of living alone. Her world was her bungalow, a small fortress protecting her from the unpredictability outside. The final hours of her life were marked by the plain, ordinary activities that defined her existence. On Friday, January 11th, 2013, she was briefly seen going about her daily tasks. The following evening, Saturday, the phone in her hallway rang. It was a friend. They spoke briefly, their conversation floating on gentle currents of neighborhood news and quiet pleasantries. Around 5:00 p.m., Una ended the call, the click of the receiver echoing in the still house. She was expecting a quiet evening. That was the last time anyone would hear her speak. Outside, the January sky showed shades of purplish gray like a bruise, the air sharp with the promise of a cold night. The world beyond her windows was winding down, settling into weekend rest. But inside the walls of her tidy little bungalow, a terrible and invisible storm was gathering. Sunday, January 13th, dawned clear and cold. For Una's family, it seemed like any other day, marked by the comforting ritual of Sunday lunch. Her niece, Judith Payne, and Judith's husband, John, expected her arrival. As the hour passed with no sign of Una, a small seed of worry took root. John Payne got into his car and drove the short distance to Magazine Lane. He pulled up to the familiar bungalow, a picture of calm in the pale winter light. He approached the front door and pressed the bell. Its ring seemed unusually loud in the Sunday stillness. He waited. No response came. He rang again, holding it slightly longer this time. A twinge of unease began to stir inside him. Still silence. The house remained mute and sealed, as if holding its breath. He tried the door, but found it locked as usual. Peering through a window revealed nothing out of place, but the quiet felt wrong, oppressive now, and John's concern escalated into fear. He managed to gain entry. How he did so became blurred in what awaited him inside. Stepping into the hallway shifted reality abruptly. The air was thick, carrying sharp smells of smoke mixed with something else, metallic and sickening. And on the floor lay Una. She was face down, her small form motionless with arms at her sides and legs extended. Around her head, the carpet was soaked with dark stains forming grim halos of blood and other fluids. Charred fragments of newspaper lay scattered like somber fallen leaves, while part of the wall showed blackening from flames. John Payne's mind rejected what his eyes were seeing. Fire damage, burnt remnants, singed fabric hanging nearby. Yet repeatedly, his gaze returned to the motionless shape on the floor, and he knew with icy certainty she was dead. He fumbled with his phone, fingers clumsy with shock, failed to dial properly, then stumbled outdoors. He found a neighbor woman, Miss Buckle, and managed to speak enough phrases to convey the emergency. Miss Buckle, taking control, used Una's phone to contact emergency services. Her voice tense but firm as she sketched a frantic picture for the operator, suggesting Una might have been caught in a fire. The words hung in the air, understating the grotesqueness of the hallway horror. The initial report painted the incident as an unfortunate accident, a narrative that would temporarily misdirect the pursuit of truth down a gravely mistaken path. When the first two officers arrived at Magazine Lane, they entered a zone of silent ruin. What they saw, or believed they saw, became a foundational flaw in the investigation, a serious misjudgment that would plague the case for a long time. They viewed the scorched wall, the burned fabric, the elderly woman motionless on the floor, and built a story of tragic accident. Their theory seemed straightforward and superficially convincing. Una, a frail 86-year-old, might have been cooking. A fire started, perhaps from the stove. She grabbed a tea towel, an instinctive response, and tried to smother the flames, but instead set her own clothing alight. They concluded that the shock and horror of it all triggered a fatal heart attack. The wounds on her neck were likely from the constriction of her scarf as she fell. A macabre coincidence. Based on this flawed judgment, the two officers determined that Una Crown's death was not suspicious, just a heartbreaking but non-criminal incident. This verdict had immediate and catastrophic consequences. The bungalow on Magazine Lane was not secured as a potential crime scene. Protocols were ignored. Evidence that might have revealed the truth was handled with a carelessness that seems stunning in hindsight. A key found at the scene was cleaned, removing any possible fingerprints from whoever had last touched it. The integrity of the scene was compromised before the full story could emerge. For 2 days, the official narrative held that Una Crown had died in a terrible accident. But truth has a stubborn resistance to being buried. On January 15th, 2 days after her body was discovered, Una's remains underwent examination by a pathologist. The sterile environment of the morgue would reveal what the chaotic scene in the hallway had concealed. The medical examiner looked past the burns and saw the truth written on her body in the most unambiguous way. Una Crown had not died of a heart attack. She had been stabbed multiple times with savage, unmistakable force. Wounds covered her neck and chest, and her throat had been brutally slashed. The fire was no accident. It was a clumsy and frantic attempt to destroy evidence of murder, to burn away any traces left by the killer and their brutality. Suddenly, everything changed. The story of a tragic accident dissolved, replaced by the grim certainty of homicide. A murder investigation began, but it was one already compromised, delayed by 2 crucial days, and starting with a contaminated crime scene. The mishandling of the initial response was later condemned by the coroner, and the 2 officers responsible for the first assessment were found to have breached professional standards of conduct. It was an apology incapable of turning back time, an admission of fault that offered little comfort to family now facing not only grief, but the knowledge that critical opportunities to catch Una's killer had been irretrievably lost. The police now faced a daunting task. They were behind in an investigation where every hour mattered. A public appeal went out, a call for anyone who'd seen anything unusual on that quiet Saturday to come forward. The investigation began focusing on people in Una's close circle who knew the cautious, security-minded widow and had been to her home. Less than 3 weeks after Una's death, on January 31st, 2013, police made an arrest. The person taken in for questioning was a neighbor, a kitchen fitter named David Newton. He lived nearby on Magazine Close, just steps from Una's bungalow. He was interviewed over 2 days, held on suspicion of murder, but denied any involvement. He was bailed until June, re-interviewed, then released due to insufficient evidence to prosecute. The trail went cold. The years that followed were marked by profound silence. For Una's family, it was 10 years of unanswered questions, a long limbo where grief could never fully transition into healing. Justice remained an elusive ideal, an unreachable horizon. Despite periodic police appeals that kept the case in the public eye, no major breakthroughs occurred. In June 2014, 2 more men were arrested in connection with her death, but were likewise released without charges. By March 2023, a decade after the murder, the charity Crime Stoppers announced a £20,000 sterling reward for information leading to a conviction. A sign that authorities hadn't given up hope. A ghostly reminder of a crime that had wounded the community and refused to fade. Around the same time, in an eerie echo of history, another woman was found murdered in her Wisbech bungalow in January 2023, almost exactly 10 years after Una's death. The victim, 47-year-old Eliza Bibby, had also been stabbed in the neck. The parallels between the 2 cases unleashed renewed fear across the town. Though someone would later be convicted of Bibby's murder, the similar incident stood as a sharp reminder of the violence Una Crown had endured 10 years earlier. For 10 years, David Newton carried on with his life, continuing to live locally as someone once questioned for murder, then released, presumably thinking he'd escape justice, that the initial police errors combined with time's passage had buried his secret forever. But within the sterile, climate-controlled confines of a forensics laboratory, a tiny, almost invisible piece of history waited. In October 2022, Cambridge police, during a routine review of cold cases, decided to re-examine Una Crown's murder. In the 10 years since her death, technology had leaped forward dramatically. Techniques once considered futuristic were now standard in forensic analysis. The investigators turned their attention back to evidence collected and carefully preserved from the post-mortem in 2013. Clippings from the fingernails of Una's unburned right hand. In the last desperate moments of her life, Una Crown had fought back. In her struggle with her attacker, she had scratched at him, collecting microscopic amounts of his DNA beneath her nails. It was a final, silent testimony, a message from the dead, waiting for the right technology to decode it. Back in 2013, the DNA sample had been too small and too complex to generate a clear profile. But by 2023, revolutionary new techniques had emerged. Scientists could now target exclusively male DNA, filtering out the victim's own genetic material to isolate the killers. When they applied this new method to the clippings from Una's nails, forensic experts found it, a distinct male DNA profile. That profile was run through the national database and came back with a match: David Newton, the neighbor who'd been arrested and released a decade earlier. The man who'd claimed he hadn't seen Una on the day she died, or in the days before. The DNA placed him at the crime scene, under her fingernails, a silent, irrefutable witness to the struggle that ended her life. The 10-year silence was broken. In April 2024, more than 11 years after, Una Crown was found dead in her hallway. David Newton, now 69 years old, was arrested again. This time there would be no release. He was charged with murdering Una Crown. The wheels of justice, stalled for so long, began turning again. The trial of David Newton opened at Cambridge Crown Court in January 2012, nearly 12 years to the day since Una's body was found. Newton, now 70 and in declining health, sat in the defendant's box, denying the charge. The prosecution, led by John Price KC, laid out their case to the jury, saying the heart of their evidence was the DNA proof. Price described the initial police failure to identify a murder as a serious misjudgment, but insisted the scientific evidence uncovered 10 years later was indisputable. Male DNA matching David Newton's profile was identified by scientists in 2023. Price told the jury it was found on nail clippings from Una's unburned right hand. This, he argued, was the damning evidence linking Newton to the violent struggle that ended her life. The prosecution didn't need to prove motive. The reasons why Newton went to Mrs. Crown's home and why he killed her are not matters that the prosecution needs to prove, they argued. The forensic evidence was enough. The court heard the distressing details of the crime. The pathologist's report outlined multiple stab wounds and defensive injuries, indicating a savage and prolonged knife attack on a vulnerable elderly woman in her own home. The prosecution painted a picture of Newton entering Una's home, a place where she should have felt safe, and launching a ferocious assault. He then set fires in a crude attempt to cover his tracks, an unsuccessful effort to obliterate his crime. The jury heard how Una's family had found her, and about the shock and terror of that Sunday lunch that never happened. The trial had its own drama. In an odd development, it emerged in court that 3 of 5 fingernail clippings from Una's left hand had disappeared from a sealed evidence bag sometime between 2013 and 2024. A forensic specialist testified that it was unclear what happened to them, though she speculated they were likely lost when the bag was opened in a laboratory. While this raised questions, the crucial evidence from the right hand remained. Newton's defense team, led by Henry Grunwald KC, argued that Newton was now a changed man, elderly and in very poor health, suffering from depression and other ailments. They pointed out that his last court appearance had been many years ago, trying to paint him as a frail old man far removed from heinous acts committed over a decade earlier. For 3 weeks, the jury absorbed the evidence, a story of a quiet life violently ended, a flawed investigation, and science finally delivering answers. After deliberating for 29 hours and 13 minutes, the jury foreman stood. David Newton looked visibly shocked, mouth agape, as he was told to rise. By a majority verdict of 10-2, he was found guilty. The jury convicted David Newton of murdering Una Crown-Wat. An era of waiting had ended. Inside the courtroom, there was a subdued sense of relief. Outside, Detective Superintendent Ian Moore, who had taken over the long cold case, acknowledged the police's early mistakes. The original investigation in 2013 had failings, and we have apologized to Una's family, he said. For over 10 years, the killer thought he'd got away with this dreadful crime. But today's result shows you cannot evade justice forever. On February 14th, 2025, David Newton was brought back to Cambridge Crown Court for sentencing. Mr. Justice Neil Garnham looked at the septuagenarian before him and delivered his judgment. He described the crime in unflinching terms. It was a savage and prolonged knife attack on a vulnerable elderly lady in her own home, he said. He spoke of the terror Una must have felt in her final moments. During the time from Newton's entry into her home until the fatal attack, a period in which she must have been extremely frightened, David Newton received a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years before he could be considered for parole. Accounting for time already served, his sentence was adjusted to 20 years and 61 days. Given his advanced age and poor health, this amounted to a de facto life sentence. He's expected to die in prison. For Una Crown's family, the verdict and sentence marked the end of a long and painful ordeal. They were finally able to find reasons to smile again. Justice, though delayed, has finally been achieved, they said. The Una Crown case is a story of human error alongside the relentless progress of forensic science. It tells of a flawed investigation that allowed a murderer to walk free for 10 years, but also showcases the determined, steady work of detectives who kept the case alive. At its core, it's the story of Una, a private widow who fought back in her final moments, leaving behind a microscopic clue that ultimately ensured her killer could not stay hidden forever. Story 8. In the heart of Indianapolis, where the White River winds gently through the cityscape, the metropolis pulses with the rhythm of daily life. Workers hurrying home, families gathering for meals, and the distant hum of traffic mixing with the coolness of evening. On December 12th, 2012, as twilight descended upon White River State Park, Charisse Walker Bingham set out for what she expected would be a routine evening walk with her beloved German Shepherds. At 51 years old, Charisse was a woman who embodied quiet strength and unwavering devotion. Her life was a tapestry woven with family connections, career commitment, and a deep love for the simple pleasures that grounded her. Coming from a close-knit family in Indiana, she was the third child among 4 siblings: Malcolm, Keith, Charisse, and her. Raised by their mother, Carol, and Mason Walker in a household rich with laughter, shared meals, and the unbreakable bonds of kinship. Charisse's childhood was marked by a giving nature. She was known by those close to her as someone with immense kindness, always ready to help or offer an encouraging word. Her energy was infectious, and her loyalty to those she held dear ran deep. Charisse's journey brought her into marriage with Eugene Bingham Jr., a partnership that began with hope, but gradually weakened under financial pressures and hidden tensions. The couple had shared decades together, navigating life's ups and downs in Indianapolis, where Eugene worked as an auto mechanic, his hands often stained with grease from long hours in the shop. Charisse, on the other hand, carved her own professional path in sales, eventually landing a job at Gatorade that gave her routine purpose and stability. She thrived in her role, her friendly demeanor making her skilled at building relationships with clients and coworkers. But as time passed, cracks appeared in their bond. By 2012, they were going through divorce proceedings, the legalities adding extra stress to an already complicated life. Friends and family watched Charisse's resilience throughout this period. She threw herself into her work, treasured time with her siblings and mother, and found comfort in her 2 German shepherds, whom she viewed as her children, calling them her babies. These dogs, formidable and protective, were not merely pets to her. They were companions on her evening walks along the familiar paths of the White River Trail, a ritual that granted her peace amid chaos. The trail itself was a peaceful refuge, a paved track following the riverbank, bordered by bare trees in the winter cold and the soft glow of distant city lights. On that fateful night, around 8:00 p.m., Cherise left her home near the park, holding a leash for at least one of her dogs, the other possibly roaming freely, as was her usual practice within the secure boundaries of the trail. She brought along her .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol in a case, a safety measure she'd adopted for self-defense during her solitary outings, though her family later confirmed she only ever took it from its safe place in dire circumstances. Dressed in practical winter gear, a jacket, black gloves, and supportive shoes, she stepped into the encroaching darkness, breathing in the crisp air while her dogs paced beside her. Initially uneventful, it was one of those routine walks that calmed her spirit, letting her thoughts drift from divorce documents and mounting bills to musings about upcoming holiday gatherings with family. Unknown to her, this ordinary moment would spiral into horror. Her life would be snuffed out in a way that would haunt Indianapolis and keep those dear to her endlessly seeking closure. As time passed, without Cherise's return, anxiety began brewing in the Bingham home. Eugene, expecting her prompt comeback, felt unsettled but initially attributed it to an extended route. By late night, apprehension escalated into panic. Attempts to reach her went unanswered, and the silence from her cell phone was overwhelming. It was only the following day, December 13th, that a jogger discovered a distressing sight near where West New York Street meets Limestone Street along White River Parkway. There, motionless on the frigid ground, lay Cherise, partially hidden by bushes, blood marking the earth beneath her. Her 2 German shepherds stood watchful over their owner, their growls low and threatening, preventing anyone from getting too close. The dog's fierce defensive instincts forced first responders to proceed carefully. They needed time to calm and secure them before they could access Cherise, only to discover she showed no signs of life and was fatally gone. The scene was heartbreaking. A woman who'd radiated such energy now lay lifeless in winter's bite. Personal belongings were scattered about, as if from a frantic struggle. Her cell phone, an Indiana gun carry license, 2 black winter gloves, and the small caliber handgun that had become the means of her death. Emergency personnel and Indiana State Police arrived at the scene quickly. The area was cordoned off while investigators began gathering evidence beneath the overcast dawn. Early assessments suggested a possible suicide. The gun belonged to Cherise, found beside her, and the remote location might indicate a moment of despair. But as the investigation progressed, doubts arose almost immediately. The Marion County Coroner's Office performed an autopsy, revealing Cherise had suffered a single gunshot wound to the chest, resulting in fatal injury. Yet, significantly, she survived for at least 7 minutes after being shot, enough time to attempt using her cell phone. Though the call didn't go through, traces of blood and foam on her face suggested she'd struggled or possibly cried out in pain. Her body had been repositioned by EMTs in a desperate attempt to save her. Tests for gunshot residue were inconclusive, but her posture and the disarray of belongings hinted at foul play rather than suicide. More revealing were the dogs. Rex and her second shepherd, vigilantly protecting their owner, would not have allowed a stranger to approach without confrontation. Cherise's family stressed this point. The dogs were her protectors, trained to defend, and only people they knew well, such as family members or her husband, could approach without triggering their protective instincts. Suicide seemed unlikely. Cherise was not someone who would abandon her pets helplessly in that condition. Moreover, her recent life developments such as joining a new church and thriving professionally, painted a picture of optimism rather than despair. The investigation accelerated as detectives spoke with those closest to Cheris, beginning with her husband, Eugene. He described the night with calm composure. Cheris had left for her walk around 8:00 p.m. Gun in her bag as usual, and he hadn't heard from her afterward. However, discrepancies began to appear. Eugene claimed she always took the gun on walks, but her siblings maintained it stayed safely stored at home, never carried loosely outdoors. Polygraph tests administered to him produced concerning results, failing or showing inconclusive readings repeatedly, raising alarms about his potential involvement. Cell phone data showed his device was near the location around the time of the incident, though he denied being there. The couple's troubled marriage provided context. The divorce was contentious, with financial disputes over properties in Marion and Hendricks counties, and Cheris's life insurance policies becoming a point of contention. Protective Life Insurance had issued 2 policies on her life. Following her death being classified as murder on her death certificate, issues arose under Indiana's Slayer statute, which prevents a killer from profiting from their victim's estate. Eugene and Cheris's brother, Keith Walker, Sr. A., acting as executor of her estate, faced off legally over the funds. The case was paused, pending criminal charges against Eugene. As weeks became months, the investigation deepened, revealing more about Cheris's life. She was a devoted sister who frequently met with Keith and Malcolm for family dinners, her laughter filling the room as they reminisced about their youth in Indianapolis. Her mother Carol remembered Cheris's kindness, always organizing holiday events to make sure everyone felt welcome. Professionally, she was a rising talent, her sales skills honed through years of determination. Joining a new church marked spiritual renewal amid marital stress. Yet darkness clouded her marriage. Friends whispered about arguments over finances, Eugene's controlling behavior, and Cheris's growing independence. Detectives scoured the scene for evidence. No signs of struggle beyond scattered objects. No witnesses despite the trail's frequent use. And the gun's placement suggested it was fired nearby, but not by her own hand. The dog's behavior was crucial. Unleashed and unharmed, they remained beside her, inferring the attacker was someone trusted whom they wouldn't assault. This pointed suspicion directly back to Eugene, the only other person deeply familiar with Cheris and her animals. By early 2013, authorities officially classified it as murder. Initial coroner doubts were replaced by proof of homicide. Indiana State Police Detective Lester Norville headed the investigation, examining affidavits and property records that revealed Eugene's complicated finances. Cheris and he co-owned homes, while divorce papers disclosed debts and assets that could fuel desperation. Keith Walker, Cheris's steadfast brother, became the family spokesperson, converting initial fury into determination and pursuit of justice. At first, I felt enraged, ready to act recklessly, he later said, his words heavy with sorrowful loss. The family held vigils along the trail, laying flowers where Cheris fell, their mourning an open plea for anyone with information. The holidays proved most difficult. Without Cheris's comforting presence, the gatherings felt incomplete, her absence like an open wound. Malcolm echoed his brother's feelings, portraying Cheris as hard-working, a devoted wife who cared deeply even amid marital troubles. 2 years dragged by painfully. The investigation remained active as leads emerged, yet yielded no concrete results. Then in 2014, what seemed like a breakthrough occurred with Eugene's arrest and murder indictment. The affidavit of probable cause outlined his failed polygraphs, cell tower data, and the significance of the dogs, illustrating opportunity and intent. The public buzzed. Local news outlets like the Indianapolis Star covered the developments, with Cheris's family voicing cautious optimism. Eugene had denied all charges, maintaining his innocence in interviews, his features marked by the strain of the accusations. Court hearings approached, but just a month before the August 2015 trial, the Marion County Prosecutor's Office dropped the charges, citing insufficient evidence for a conviction. "Our evidence wasn't as strong as we'd hoped," Detective Norville admitted, noting crucial forensic details were lacking. The case dismissal was a crushing blow. Keith felt the legal system had failed his sister, yet he clung to the belief that truth would eventually prevail. On the civil front, proceedings moved forward in U.S. District Court, Southern District of Indiana, where an interpleader suit concerning Charisse's life insurance policy was handled. Protective Life had deposited the money with the court, concerned about Eugene's possible liability under the Slayer rule. Keith, as a state representative, filed a wrongful death claim against Eugene, seeking accountability outside criminal proceedings. However, in 2016, the court dismissed supplemental claims without prejudice and transferred jurisdiction over fund distribution to Marion Superior Court. Ultimately, the disputed funds were awarded to Eugene, a result that deepened the family's sense of injustice. Charisse's estate was settled for a modest sum, the compensation inadequate for the life that had ended. Time moved forward steadily, each year marking another period without answers. In 2016, on the 4th anniversary, the family made a public appeal for information. Keith stood near the trail holding photos of Charisse, her smile a poignant reminder of what had been taken. By 2022, a decade later, grief had softened into steadfast resolve. Law enforcement reaffirmed the investigation was ongoing, with persons of interest being monitored, though regulations prevented directly naming Eugene. Sergeant John Payne, of the Indiana State Police, encouraged anyone with information to come forward, expressing certainty someone possessed crucial knowledge. "We are quite sure someone knows what happened," he stated, offering a beacon of hope to those seeking closure. Keith, now steadied by faith, reflected on his sister's impact. She was generous and loved her dogs. Unfortunately rehomed after the incident, their protective nature reflecting Charisse's close bond with them. As 2025 neared, marking 12 years since the unsolved case began, White River Trail remained a site of reflection for the family. Memorials continued. Clues from the dog's behavior hinted at inside involvement. Forensic results remained ambiguous, and Eugene avoided direct statements while living quietly under suspicion's shadow, its burden darkening his days. For those affected by Charisse's loss, finality remained elusive, but hope persisted through Keith's unwavering motto. "One day truth will emerge," words resonating in conversations, embodying faith in justice ultimately prevailing. Charisse's mother, Carol, spent years treasuring memories of her daughter, whose brilliance illuminated their household, until fate intervened brutally one winter evening when she struggled desperately, gasping breaths, fumbling for her phone nearby, her canine companions whimpering beside her. The tragedy pierced deep into the family, raising themes of devotion versus possible deceit that haunt survivors left behind. Grappling with grief and unanswered questions, lingering still today amid ongoing efforts by officials reviewing past evidence and fresh tips alike, awaiting that breakthrough moment. The White River flows onward endlessly, whispering echoes belonging solely to Sheriff Walker Bingham, awaiting justice to break the silence conclusive. Story 9. The Australian sun, even as it sets, remains a powerful and intense presence. On the evening of December 29th, 1979, its final light painted the sky in deep purples and fiery oranges above the vast wild bushland of Carrigaline, a semi-rural area tucked within the Perth Hills of Western Australia. From his spotter plane, a forestry department pilot surveyed the landscape, his eyes sharp for the telltale smoke plumes that signaled danger in the dry Australian summer. He was monitoring a nearby bushfire, a common occurrence in this region, when he spotted another thin thread of smoke drifting lazily into the evening sky from the thick undergrowth of the Canning Dam catchment area. It was a small, isolated fire. Nothing to cause immediate alarm. Just another minor element in the wide canvas of the Australian wilderness. He noted it mentally and continued his patrol, not realizing he was witnessing a funeral pyre. The next day, the grim meaning of that small fire became clear. A search team sent to investigate the smoke's origin came upon a scene of almost ritualistic dread. There, in a clearing about 800 meters south of the Brookton Highway, lay the charred remains of a tree. Leaning against it in a twisted and final embrace was the severely burned body of a young woman. The air, thick with the acrid smell of scorched wood and something far more sinister, was oppressive and still. The bush's silence was absolute, broken only by the buzzing of flies and the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. The deceased was soon identified as 22-year-old Karen Mary Tate, a woman who'd journeyed to Western Australia seeking a fresh start, but found instead a cruel and tragic end. The murder scene presented an array of disturbing details. Her body had been deliberately positioned atop the smoldering stump, and around her lay a semicircle of burned objects, an arrangement that quickly sparked vivid speculation in media reports and public imagination. Whispers of witchcraft and occult rituals began to circulate, a sensational storyline attempting to force some warped meaning onto an act of incomprehensible brutality. The autopsy report told a more straightforward, though equally dreadful, story. Karen hadn't died in the flames. She'd been beaten to death, her skull fractured by multiple blows from a heavy, blunt object. A bloodied piece of timber found nearby was believed to be the likely weapon. An ordinary object transformed into an instrument of savage finality. The fire, investigators determined, wasn't ritualistic but a clumsy and frantic attempt to destroy evidence, to erase Karen from existence as thoroughly as her killer had ended her life. Karen Tate's last known movements began to sketch out a vague and fragmented timeline. On Saturday morning, December 29th, just hours before she died, she'd been dropped off at her Mount Lawley home, an inner-city Perth suburb, by a friend. She'd spent the previous night socializing with friends in the coastal neighborhoods of Cottesloe and Swanbourne, an evening filled with youthful fun and easy companionship. She was supposed to go to Carragullen that afternoon to house-sit for friends, a simple task that should have been a routine part of her day. She never made it. Somewhere between the familiar streets of Mount Lawley and the winding rural roads of the Perth Hills, Karen's path crossed with that of her killer. Authorities speculated she'd likely been hitchhiking, a common practice at the time, and accepted a ride from someone dangerous. In that moment, her fate was sealed. The 6-hour window between her last confirmed sighting and her estimated time of death became a void of unanswered questions, a gap where Karen disappeared, only to reappear as a victim in a terrifying story. Who was Karen Tate? In the immediate aftermath of her killing, she was a ghost, a name and a photo in the newspaper with little background. No family in Western Australia spoke for her. No collective mourning came from those closest to her. This void only fed wild speculation, the idea that she had a mysterious past. But decades later, when the full truth emerged, it told not of dark mystery, but of quiet sorrows instead. Karen was the eldest of 5 siblings, raised along Sydney's sunny northern beaches. She was described as happy in her own company, yet having few close friends alongside many social contacts. In 1975, she married an Englishman, opening up new life prospects, including hopes of starting a family. But hope was brutally stolen. One twin daughter, aged just 14 weeks, died, likely from sudden infant death syndrome. That loss was a shattering blow, leaving a permanent scar. In 1978, seeking a new beginning in a place where the past felt less immediate, she moved to Western Australia, hoping to build a fresh life under the region's sunshine and open landscapes. The investigation into her murder was thorough and extensive, but it eventually hit a dead end. Investigators had a crime scene, a victim, and a likely murder weapon. They also had the intriguing evidence of an unknown male DNA sample, carefully extracted from collected items. A tiny lead they hoped would someday guide them to the killer. But in 1979, the ability to fully leverage such evidence didn't yet exist. The investigation stalled, its files gathering dust on shelves, becoming another unsolved murder among many. For Karen's family, living thousands of kilometers away in New South Wales, there was no resolution, only the persistent ache of uncertainty. Time stretched into decades, with seasons changing over the isolated bushland where Karen had taken her last breath. But the Western Australia Police Force never forgot Karen Tate. Her file remained active, a persistent and unresolved question in their cold case records. For 45 years, her killer's ghost remained free, an anonymous figure who seemed to have evaded justice for murder. Then, in the 21st century, a breakthrough in forensic science offered renewed hope. This innovation was investigative genetic genealogy, a pioneering technique that combined modern DNA analysis with vast public ancestry databases. It was a strategy famously used to identify the Golden State Killer in the United States, a man who'd terrorized California for years. Cold case investigators in Perth wondered if it could deliver similar results for Karen. The process was painstaking and complex. The unknown male DNA from the scene was entered into a public genealogy database, beginning a search for matches. It wasn't about finding an exact match. Instead, the investigative team started identifying distant genetic relatives, far-removed cousins who shared their DNA to explore their ancestry. From these scattered connections, they built a family tree, an elaborate web of relationships that expanded to include more than 10,000 individuals. It was a massive undertaking, a genealogical puzzle of epic proportions. Slowly and carefully, they narrowed the possibilities, eliminating family branches, until they focused on one significant suspect, Terrence John Fisher. He was a man who'd lived and died largely unnoticed by society, his identity not publicly recognized, his life appearing ordinary. But as detectives probed his history, a disturbing picture began to form. Fisher had been a soldier in the Australian Army from 1970 to 1972. He worked as a carpenter on public buildings and eventually established his own business. He was an active member of the Fremantle Sailing Club, having built his own sailboat and spending leisure time on the water. He was married, then divorced, and had no children. He frequented bars near where Karen was last seen. At the time of her murder, he lived in Rivervale and Manning, Perth's suburbs that positioned him geographically close enough to have encountered her on that fateful day. The pieces were aligning. But one vital element was missing. Terrence John Fisher had died of cancer in 2000 at age 50. He'd taken his secrets to his grave, escaping accountability for a crime committed over 20 years earlier. Law enforcement could never prosecute him or see him stand trial for his actions. But they could reveal his identity. They could give Karen's family what they'd been denied for so long, an answer. The announcement in March 2025 resonated across Australia. After 45 years, the bushfire murder case was solved. Karen Tate's killer had finally been identified. For her siblings who'd endured decades of doubt, the news evoked a complicated mixture of emotions: relief, finality, and profound grief for the sister lost so long ago. It holds great importance as it reinforces trust in detectives, police officers, and all those dedicated to resolving such crimes, Karen's sister Emery said. It also brings comfort knowing he's deceased and can no longer harm others. Her brother Matt echoed this sentiment, but urged anyone who knew Fisher to come forward and help complete the story. No one kills without some reason, he stated. We lack those answers. People may not realize what they know or consider it unimportant, but they must come forward. Identifying Terrence John Fisher as Karen's murderer was a victory blending modern scientific methods with traditional investigative work. But it also opened a grim and unsettling new chapter in the story. Investigators began considering Fisher in connection with other unsolved murders, and a frightening possibility started to emerge. They believed that if Fisher were still alive, he could potentially help with their investigations into the deaths of two other women, Barbara Western in 1986 and Carrie Ann Stuthridge Turner in 1991. The parallels were alarming. Barbara Western's remains were discovered in March 1990 in the same Carrigullen bushland where Karen's body had been found, just 500 meters away. Carrie Turner's body was found concealed behind a log near the Canning Dam, close to the other crime scenes. The long-whispered theory that a serial killer had been active in the Perth Hills suddenly had an identity and a face. Terence John Fisher, the seemingly average carpenter and sailing enthusiast, might have been a hunter, someone who'd stalked and killed multiple women. His crimes remained hidden for years through a combination of luck and the limitations of forensic technology at the time. Authorities have been careful to clarify that Fisher is a person of interest, not a proven murderer in these additional cases, but the DNA evidence linking him to Karen Tate's killing is strong and convincing. The investigation into his life and activities continues. A painstaking effort is underway to map the geography of his crimes, to understand the full extent of the terror he may have inflicted. Police have unusually issued a detailed profile of Fisher, asking the public for any information, no matter how small or seemingly trivial, that could help solve the mystery of his life. The Karen Tate case is one of deep sorrow and extraordinary persistence. It tells of a young woman's life violently ended and a family's long, agonizing wait for closure. It stands as a tribute to the steady, relentless work of cold case investigators who never allowed her memory to fade. And it serves as a powerful illustration of how science and technology can reach back through time, illuminating the darkest corners of the past and delivering some measure of justice, however belated, to those who suffered unthinkable crimes. For 45 years, Terence John Fisher was a phantom, an unknown killer who'd literally gotten away with murder. Now, thanks to the tireless work of detectives and the power of genetic genealogy, his name is public knowledge, his image is widely known, and his legacy is not one of quiet anonymity, but of brutal alleged serial violence. The fire he set in the Australian wilderness all those years ago may have destroyed Karen Tate's body, but it couldn't erase her memory or hide his guilt forever. The smoke from that blaze has finally cleared, revealing the killer's face and providing long-awaited comfort to a family that has grieved for so long in uncertainty. This case stands as a stark warning to offenders who think their past is buried. The dead may be silent, but their DNA speaks volumes, and ultimately, truth prevails. For Karen Tate's murderer, that final reckoning came 25 years after his own death, an inescapable judgment from beyond the grave itself. Story 10. On the morning of Sunday, February 4th, 2024, the day dawned, heralding a scorching Australian summer in Ballarat, Victoria. In the peaceful Eureka neighborhood, the Murphy residence was a picture of weekend calm. Samantha Murphy, a vibrant 51-year-old woman celebrated for her glowing vitality and commitment to her loved ones, was preparing for her usual morning run. A mother to 3 children and a business partner with her husband, Michael, Samantha was a cornerstone of her community and the emotional center of her household. Friends and family described her as a spirited, joyful soul who spread happiness to everyone she met. Her life was woven from patterns of daily routine, family bonds, and a love for nature. The previous evening, Samantha and Michael had entertained friends over dinner. The conversation was relaxed, filled with the comfortable camaraderie of old friends. Samantha, a dedicated runner, talked about her plans for the following day. a challenging 14-kilometer run along the well-known paths of Uninterrupted Regional Park, an area locals fondly call the Canadian State Forest. This was a route she knew intimately, a retreat where she could refresh her mind and test her endurance. Around 7 a.m., the familiar outline of Samantha Murphy was captured one last time by a surveillance camera in her home's driveway. Dressed in running gear, she moved with the purpose and grace of an experienced athlete, leaving the frame and heading toward the wilderness adjacent to her neighborhood. The sun was beginning to rise, and forecasts indicated temperatures would soar to a blistering 36 degrees Celsius. But for someone as fit and determined as she was, it seemed like just another routine day and another run. The family had plans for later that morning, a brunch scheduled for 11:00 a.m. There was no reason to think she wouldn't return promptly, glowing from her accomplishment and ready for the day ahead. Time passed. The sun climbed to its zenith, radiating heat onto Ballarat's quiet streets. The 11:00 a.m. Brunch time came and went without Samantha's return. A hint of worry swelled into a wave of real dread. Her not coming back was utterly out of character. Michael and their children tried reaching her phone, but their calls went unanswered. Minutes dragged into an hour, then 2. By late afternoon, the family's anxiety had intensified into full-scale emergency. They contacted Victoria Police, and with that call, the Murphys' lives were forever altered. The initial search was swift, driven by rising temperatures and the disturbing silence from Samantha.b. Victoria Police issued a public statement expressing their and the family's concern for Samantha's welfare because of the extreme heat and her uncharacteristic absence. The Ballarat community responded with an overwhelming show of support as numerous volunteers joined with law enforcement to search the vast, wild expanse of Uninterrupted Regional Park. The operation was massive, a multitude of determined people, navigating dense undergrowth and winding dirt paths, calling her name into the unsettling quiet of the woods. Detectives began meticulously reconstructing Samantha's final confirmed movements. Cell phone records offered an essential but alarming clue. Signals from her phone showed she'd reached the Mount Clear area on the forest's edge around 8:00 a.m. Beyond that point, all digital traces stopped. Early CCTV footage that some thought depicted Samantha running on a road sparked a momentary surge of hope. However, it faded when a citizen confirmed it wasn't her in the footage. The woodland that had once been her sanctuary had transformed into the setting for an alarming mystery. Days merged into a week as the hunt expanded. Specialized teams such as mounted branch officers, dog squad members, and air wing personnel were deployed to search the Canadian State Forest areas, along with Enfield State Park grounds and Bonignong Bushland Reserve zones. Expansive, rough terrains where someone could disappear without leaving any trace. Despite thorough efforts, no results emerged. No torn clothing, no shoe prints, no signs of either slipping or accident. The total lack of findings became itself an ominous hint, implying this wasn't just about a hiker straying off the path. Law enforcement's investigation began shifting direction, the terminology moving from describing a case involving a lost person toward suggesting foul play. The lead detective openly expressed the opinion that chances were slim she departed voluntarily, indicating external interference as the probable cause. Shortly thereafter, authorities announced their conviction that Samantha was likely deceased. The incident gripped the entire country, its unsettling essence echoing well past Ballarat's limits. Even Prime Minister Anthony Albanese conveyed condolences, acknowledging the profound grief and uncertainty endured by the Murphys. Publicly, the story evoked deep-seated fear, highlighting how vulnerable anyone can be even in familiar surroundings. The abrupt, incomprehensible loss of a relative from everyday reality. For more than 30 days, the investigation proceeded discreetly, a persistent and steady quest for truth. On March 6, 2024, the pivotal moment the nation had been waiting for arrived. Officers from the Missing Persons Unit arrested a 22-year-old man. His identity, initially withheld by judicial order to preserve impartial proceedings, was eventually disclosed as Patrick Orrin Stevenson. The accused, son of a former AFL athlete, faced charges for Samantha Murphy's murder. This accusation resonated intensely across the community. Stevenson entered a plea of not guilty, introducing another painful chapter in the family's ordeal. However, the arrest didn't provide the comfort the Murphy family desperately sought. A crucial question remained unanswered. What had become of Samantha? Stevenson, steadfast in his claim of innocence, gave no indication of where her remains might be. The charge rested on an extensive collection of evidence assembled by law enforcement, described in legal settings as an unprecedented amount of data. Yet the absence of a body perpetuated a raw grief. In the months that followed, the search continued, now more focused. In a notable development, investigators located Samantha's mobile device, its turquoise case, undamaged, near a dam in Buninyong, approximately 10 minutes from her home. Subsequently, in a striking and widely observed action, authorities escorted Stevenson from prison to the investigation area in a final attempt to prompt a confession or uncover fresh evidence. He allegedly remained silent, his assertion of non-involvement unwavering. As the legal process moved toward a hearing scheduled for April 8, 2026, Samantha's family remained trapped in a limbo of unresolved mourning. Her mother, Pam Robson, addressed the public for the first time on the anniversary marking 1 year since her daughter vanished. Her expression bore the immense weight of maternal loss. "We hold on to hope that she will be found one day. She must be out there somewhere," she said. "We simply want to hold a service for her." Her plea exposed the harsh reality of their situation. They'd not only been deprived of a daughter, wife, and mother, but they were also robbed of the essential ceremony to honor her passing. The family's comments painted a picture of a person whose absence had left a vast emptiness. They remembered her as a determined and ambitious woman, whose kindness was ever present, a person who always saw virtue in all people. For her mother, it meant losing not just a child, but also a closest friend. For her brothers and sisters, it signified the rupture of an exceptional and cherished connection. Their sole comfort came from trusting that Samantha would want them to unite to protect her children and surround them with the love she so freely gave. The Samantha Murphy case endures as a story lacking its concluding chapter. It's an account of a woman whose life was taken during an ordinary act of personal wellness, an account of family and community united in seeking clarity, and an account of legal mechanisms slowly progressing toward a resolution. But until Samantha is brought home, the tension and profound heartache from her loss will continue to haunt the peaceful wilderness of Ballarat. Story 11. In the lively suburbs of Kadoma City, Osaka Prefecture, where the hum of everyday life mixed with the quiet struggles of ordinary people, two young women maintained a fragile connection formed in a shared house on an unremarkable street. Sawako Watanabe, 25 years old and working part-time, moved through her life with quiet determination. Her existence was a weave of simple habits and unfulfilled dreams. She'd taken up residence in the shared accommodation in August 2015, looking for affordable companionship in the heart of Japan's energetic yet demanding urban environment. Sawako's job at a nearby business provided just enough income to meet her modest needs. Yet beneath her calm exterior lived a young soul longing for connection, with family gatherings serving as a treasured constant in her largely solitary life. Hiromi Morishima, then 29 years old, presented herself as an artist. Her days were filled with drawings and ambitions, that often conflicted with financial constraints. She also lived in the shared house until late November 2015, when she moved to a nearby apartment located just 300 meters away, leaving behind the common spaces that had previously echoed with casual conversation. Their bond, emerging from proximity, was one of familiarity rather than deep friendship, marked by coexistence and occasional interactions that masked simmering tensions. To Hiromi, who sometimes adopted the surname Nagatada, fell the burden of escalating financial obligations. As December approached, the chill in Osaka's air reflected the slight changes in Hiromi's behavior. Sawako, always the outgoing one, agreed to accompany her former housemate to a Christmas party at the apartment on December 24th, 2015. A plan that seemed harmless amid the seasonal cheer. The city's lights sparkled like distant stars, casting a festive glow on the streets where families prepared for gatherings, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding in a quiet flat. Sawako left the shared house that night, her step light with anticipation, messaging friends about her plans as the time approached 7:52 p.m. Unknown to her, this would be the last time anyone received direct word from her. Her phone soon became an instrument in a scheme of deception. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of prepared food and unspoken expectations. Hiromi had invited Sawako over, both women settling into what should have been an evening of celebration. But as the night progressed, something changed forever. Sawako was strangled between 7:52 p.m. on December 24th and 12:55 a.m. On December 25th, her body rendered lifeless in a way indicating deliberate action. Sedative pills played a role, causing unconsciousness before the lethal deed. Hiromi didn't seek help in the hours that followed. Instead, she began a calculated cover-up effort, her actions revealing a mind seized by panic or premeditation. The following morning, December 25th, dawned with typical holiday bustle. But for Sawako's family, it introduced the first twinges of worry. She'd promised to attend their Christmas gathering, a tradition holding special meaning in their close-knit household. When she didn't appear, her father reported her missing to law enforcement, his voice tinged with unease as he recounted her last known plans. Meanwhile, Hiromi acted with unsettling determination. Using Sawako's phone, she sent texts to friends and family, pacifying them with fabricated explanations. "Don't worry, I'm fine," one stated, delaying immediate investigative action. A male friend who'd spoken with Sawako earlier that evening received a message apologizing for lateness due to an urgent matter, a lie crafted posthumously. Hiromi's first destination was an ATM at a convenience store, where she withdrew more than 100,000 yen using Sawako's bank card, a withdrawal later linked by prosecutors directly to financing the concealment. With cash acquired, she went to a hardware shop in Kadoma City and purchased items, including a freezer unit and odor-absorbing materials, objects suggesting premeditation rather than spontaneity. Returning to her apartment, over the next 3 days, she methodically dismembered the remains into portions stored within purchased containers and bathroom spaces. Some segments were moved back to the shared housing, hidden inside storage areas, an attempt at dispersing proof across known locations. As festivities continued around them, unnoticed by officials initially focused elsewhere, suspicions mounted among friends receiving fewer replies. Eventually, leads directed attention toward Hiromi's dwelling. Police armed with warrants arrived December 29th, 5 days after the incident, to uncover chilling discoveries, even for experienced personnel. Within bathroom facilities and the cooling appliance lay skull fragments plus other severed pieces, identified through swift DNA analysis matching samples provided by family members. This conclusively established the victim's fate, linking everything back to Sawako, leaving no room for doubt regarding the perpetrator's involvement based on accumulated evidence, pieced together meticulously throughout the investigation. Hiromi was arrested without delay. Her first statement to authorities was a confusing mixture of denials and acknowledgments. "When I left the apartment and came back, I found her unconscious and not breathing," she told police, speaking calmly as she claimed that fear drove her to dismember the body to hide it. She insisted that Sawako had asked her to withdraw the money, an assertion that fell apart under scrutiny. Still, she completely denied the murder charge, suggesting that a third party, or a natural cause during her brief absence, was responsible, a story the court later judged to be contrived and unbelievable. As handcuffs were fastened on her wrists, the gravity of her actions became real. The apartment, now sealed as a crime scene, was isolated from society. The investigation intensified, uncovering aspects of Hiromi's existence. Prosecutors revealed she'd searched online for how to kill someone and techniques for dismembering a body. These searches occurred before the incident and indicated advanced planning. Her financial debts were substantial, with evidence suggesting the motive was a mix of monetary pressure and seizing an opportunity, taking not only cash, but a life to conceal growing debts. In the preceding months, Sawako had inadvertently become entangled in Hiromi's problems. Their past as former housemates included times when Hiromi might have stolen or mishandled money, though specifics were limited in available records. Residents of the shared house remembered Hiromi's quick, uncomfortable appearance on the evening of the party, arriving alone and claiming Sawako was still getting ready, falsehoods that bought her critical time. Sawako's family, devastated by the news, struggled with grief no holiday could mend. Her father, who'd so quickly reported her disappearance, faced the unthinkable horror of identifying her remains fragment by fragment. The emotional impact spread across Kadoma, a community where such violence seemed out of place amid the routine of jobs and domestic life. Law enforcement reconstructed the timeline. Sawako's last confirmed appearance at the communal home, Hiromi's purchases on Christmas Day, the deceptive messages sent late at night. Post-mortem examinations confirmed strangulation as the cause. The disrupted timeline matched Hiromi's departures and arrivals. When proceedings began in 2017 at the Osaka District Court, the chamber became an arena for truth and evasion. Hiromi, age 31 at that point, appeared before Judge Tomu Shibayama. Her self-proclaimed artist's hands no longer held brushes, but faced the weight of 9 charges, among them murder, theft, and desecration of a corpse. She wept during initial remarks, denying any involvement in Sawako's death. "I had no part whatsoever in the killing," she stated. Her legal team argued for another person's involvement, clinging to the story of discovery rather than commission. Prosecutors painted a damning picture, presenting the online searches as proof of planning, the stolen money as motive, and the dismemberment as a callous attempt to eliminate traces of the crime. Residents from the shared home testified about Hiromi's strange behavior that night, her solitary return raising discomfort. The hardware shop employee remembered without doubt the Christmas Day transaction, the items ordinary alone but ominous together. Sawako's father testified, his voice breaking as he described the gathering fog, the frantic phone calls, the emptiness from his daughter's loss. The emotional weight of his words hung heavy in the courtroom, personalizing the victim beyond forensic documents. Hiromi's story wavered under questioning. Her declarations of innocence conflicted with tangible proof. The purchase of a saw immediately following the death undermined her version of sudden panic. "You meticulously dismantled the body to conceal proof of the murder," Judge Shibayama would eventually state, calling it ruthless and spiteful. With profound responsibility felt throughout, tension built in court as every piece of evidence heightened anticipation for an inevitable decision. Hiromi's attorney promised to appeal, but the life imprisonment sentence issued on June 30th, 2017, seemed a just conclusion to this story of betrayal. After sentencing, reflections on this case reverberated across Japanese media, serving as a grim alert about hidden dangers in shared living situations. Sawako's legacy endured through her family's quiet grief. Her experience became a cautionary tale embedded within true crime history. Hiromi, incarcerated for life, bore denial's burden into obscurity, her artistic aspirations quenched by the darkness of her decisions. The Kadoma apartment remained vacant, a silent testament to that night's horror, while communal living resumed its usual rhythm, forever changed by absence. Hiromi Morishima's crime unraveled not through spectacular acts, but through personal breaches in daily trust. Sawako's last moments, meant for happiness, were twisted into nightmare. The faith she placed in a former roommate determined her destiny. As investigators sorted through remnants, each find raised implications, exposing not merely remains, but dreams, laughter, and kinship ended abruptly by hands once familiar. Story 12. The night air in Baton Rouge, Louisiana has a particular thickness. A humid heaviness that clings to the skin and carries the scent of magnolia blossoms and decay. It's a city pulsing with life, rich in jazz and Creole cuisine, a place where history seeps from its antebellum buildings. But beneath the veneer of genteel southern charm, a dark presence was taking root, a shadow that spread its reach across the city for 10 years, leaving a trail of fear and unanswered questions. This is the story of that shadow, the man who walked among society while preying on the vulnerable, a person known as Sean Vincent Gillis. The story begins not with a dramatic incident, but with a quiet disappearance in 1994. An elderly woman, 82-year-old Ann Bryan, vanished from her senior living facility. There were no signs of struggle, no obvious evidence left behind. She'd simply disappeared. Her case, initially a puzzling mystery, would eventually become the first chilling episode in a chronicle of unspeakable violence. For a long time, her fate remained hidden. A dormant investigation filed away in the records of the Baton Rouge Police Department. The city moved forward, its residents unaware that a threat was among them, perfecting his horrific craft. Life in Baton Rouge maintained its steady rhythm. The LSU Tigers played before enthusiastic crowds. The Mississippi River wound slowly past, and the city's residents went about their daily routines. But periodically, that rhythm would be disrupted. A woman would go missing. A body would be discovered. Each time, the circumstances were different enough to obscure a clear pattern, yet similar enough to suggest one malicious force at work. The victims were diverse, spanning a wide range of the female population. Catherine Hall, 29 years old, was found strangled in 1999. Hardy Schmidt, 52, met the same fate a year later. Then came Joyce Williams, 36, and Lillian Robinson, 52. With each new victim, fear began weaving itself into the community's fabric. Women grew more cautious, locking their doors more tightly, glancing nervously over their shoulders as they approached their cars. Law enforcement was dealing with a series of seemingly unrelated murders. The killing methods were brutal and intimate, strangulation and stabbing, but the victims varied in age, race, and social standing. There was no apparent connection or clue that could crack the case. The investigation was a frustrating and methodical slog. Detectives worked tirelessly, following leads that went nowhere and questioning potential witnesses who'd seen nothing. The perpetrator was a ghost, leaving behind grief and a frustrating scarcity of evidence. DNA was collected from the scenes, a silent witness to the killer's presence. But before extensive DNA databases became common practice, it offered limited immediate help. While detectives pursued an elusive figure, Sean Vincent Gillis led a life of unremarkable obscurity. To those around him and his coworkers, he seemed like an average person. He held down a job, had personal relationships, and moved through society with an unsettling normalcy. His outward behavior gave no hint of the heinous nature concealed within. He excelled at hiding, not through disguise or elaborate deception, but through the utter ordinariness of his life. He could be anyone you'd meet at the grocery store, the driver next to you at a traffic light, or the neighbor you'd acknowledge while getting your mail. Perhaps this is one of the most frightening aspects of this story. The monster wasn't a caricatured villain, but someone indistinguishable from everyone else. Inside his home, though, another reality was taking shape. Gillis collected trophies, gruesome souvenirs from his crimes, keeping personal items from those he'd harmed, such as driver's licenses, photos, or jewelry. These objects were more than simple keepsakes. They were symbols of his power, physical validations of his control over those he'd murdered. He took pictures of his victims, not to document their deaths, but to relive the acts, to prolong the moment of supreme dominance. His house was a private exhibition of terror, a gallery of his wickedness, masked by suburban normalcy. The turning point in solving these crimes came not from brilliant police work or lucky breaks, but from progressive evidence collection and the methodical tightening of investigative focus. As scientific methods improved, DNA samples obtained from multiple crime scenes were entered into federal systems. The anticipation grew that a match might eventually connect separate incidents to one person. In early 2004, that hope materialized. DNA retrieved from Donna Bennett Johnston's murder, a 43-year-old woman found dead in February that year, matched genetic material found at sites of other unsolved killings in the Baton Rouge area. The ghost now had a genetic signature. The seemingly random murders were the work of one man, a serial killer. This revelation unleashed a fresh surge of fear across the community. But for the detectives, it was a breakthrough moment. They were no longer chasing multiple perpetrators. Their target was a single male. The specialized unit handling the investigation intensified their efforts. They revisited existing evidence, re-interviewed witnesses, and began searching for connections among the deceased that might have been missed before. The locations where bodies were found, the sequences of disappearances, and the particular methods used in the killings, every detail was carefully analyzed in the quest to find a pattern. All the while, Gillis remained at large, possibly emboldened by his long ability to avoid capture. But his luck was about to run out. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place in an unexpected way. It wasn't an eyewitness or an informant that led police to Gillis's door, but the killer himself. In a strange and audacious move, Gillis placed multiple phone calls to authorities, taunting them with details of his crimes. He seemed to be playing a game, a dangerous pursuit with those tasked with catching him. This proved to be a grave mistake. The phone calls, though meant to mock and mislead, gave police a crucial clue: the perpetrator's voice. The investigation shifted to identifying the person behind that voice. They began comparing genetic data against various records, looking for a known match that could lead them to their suspect. The meticulous work paid off. A partial genetic link was identified, pointing them toward a family with the last name Gillis. The net was closing. Law enforcement began surveillance on Sean Vincent Gillis, a man who fit the broad profile they'd constructed of the killer. He was in the right age range, lived locally, and had a history of minor crimes. To confirm their suspicion, they needed a sample of his DNA, which they obtained from a discarded cigarette butt. The lab results were definitive. The genetic material from the cigarette matched exactly with that recovered from the murder scenes. The Phantom had been given an identity. On April 29th, 2004, a team of police officers converged on Gillis's home. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The man who'd terrorized Baton Rouge for 10 years surrendered without resistance. The era of terror under this hidden threat had ended. Searching Gillis's home was like venturing into profound evil. The trophies, photos, and personal belongings of those he'd killed, everything was there, serving as eerie proof of his profound wickedness. For the investigators, it was a nauseating and surreal experience, coming face to face with physical evidence of the malevolence they'd pursued. With Gillis in custody, the full extent of his atrocities began to surface. He confessed to 8 killings, his tone steady and unemotional as he recounted the horrifying details. He talked about his victims with unsettling indifference, treating them not as human beings, but as objects for his own gratification. He directed officials to where some victims' bodies lay abandoned in isolated, desolate spots. The trial of Sean Vincent Gillis was grave and emotionally intense. The courtroom was packed with families of those he'd murdered, their faces marked by grief that was almost unbearable to witness. They listened as the prosecution detailed the charges against Gillis, presenting compelling genetic evidence, disturbing confessions, and the grim collection of mementos found in his house. Faced with an avalanche of undeniable proof, the defense had little recourse. They tried to argue that Gillis suffered from psychological disorders and lacked control over his actions. But the prosecution painted a different picture, that a shrewd and systematic killer fully aware of what he was doing. They argued that his deliberate planning, his efforts to avoid detection, and his hoarding of keepsakes all pointed to someone not mentally unsound, but deeply evil. The jury agreed. Sean Vincent Gillis was found guilty of first-degree murder for killing Donna Bennett Johnston. The sentencing phase of the trial proceeded as expected. After hearing about the appalling nature of his crimes, jurors imposed the death penalty. In another court case concerning Catherine Hall's death, he received a conviction leading to life imprisonment without parole for her murder as well. While these judgments provided some resolution for victims' families, they couldn't eliminate their anguish. Their wounds ran too deep. The scars were permanent. Baton Rouge itself also faced the task of coping with what Sean Vincent Gillis left behind, revealing depths many hadn't thought possible, underscoring how evil may hide within everyday settings behind seemingly harmless exteriors. Sean Vincent Gillis's story serves as a chilling insight into wickedness's nature, depicting someone leading two lives simultaneously, both hunter and neighbor, monster and community member. This narrative recounts the lives tragically ended by brutal, meaningless crimes, and the families who had to pick up the pieces left behind. It also tells of the relentless work by police officers who, blending traditional investigative techniques with modern advances, ensured a murderer faced legal consequences. The warm, humid evening atmosphere in Baton Rouge still carries the fragrance of magnolia blossoms and decay. But for those who remember the era of the Phantom, there's an additional scent, the faint, persistent trace of fear. The story of Sean Vincent Gillis remains an indelible part of the city's history, a dark chapter in its otherwise vibrant chronicle, serving as a reminder of a time when a monster lived in their midst. And while that monster is now behind bars, the memory of his crimes and the lives he callously erased will forever haunt the city along the Mississippi. Story 13. In the vibrant heart of Las Vegas, where the neon lights of the Strip paint the desert landscape in perpetual brilliance, Joan Albanese led a life centered on the quiet pleasures of motherhood and the simple pursuit of happiness. Born on January 20th, 1956, Joanne was a devoted single mother to two young daughters. Her world revolved around their laughter, school activities, and the safety she worked to maintain in the lively but unforgiving city. At 39 years old in 1995, she'd weathered the challenges of an earlier marriage to Tom. Their divorce left her determined to create a better life for her daughters, who were the center of her universe. Joanne's daily life was filled with the habits of a caring parent, cooking meals, attending school meetings, and nurturing a home full of warmth despite the struggles of raising children alone. She was known by loved ones as a woman of strength, someone who smiled through difficult times and always put her kids' welfare first. Unknown to her, the man who would enter her life would destroy everything she held dear, pulling her into a web of control and danger that would end fatally. Joanne first met John Patrick Addis in the spring of 1995, though he introduced himself using the false name John Edwards. He was a charming fitness instructor at World Gym, where she occasionally exercised. Addis, born in May 1950 in Flint, Michigan, had a background shrouded in darkness well before he arrived in Las Vegas. But to Joanne, he seemed like a fresh start. A man with a toned physique and an easy smile that concealed his chaotic history. He'd relocated to Nevada following periods of instability, including a stint in law enforcement in Alaska that ended abruptly due to concerns about his erratic behavior. In Alaska, Addis had worked as an animal control officer and later with the state police, but co-workers noticed his growing paranoia, calling small animals or people the enemy in a way that disturbed others. His first marriage to Jody was marked by extreme control. He dominated her every move, isolating her from friends and family, and the abuse escalated into physical violence after they moved to Sitka. Jody endured years of this torment, feeling powerless and dependent until she sought divorce in 1982, securing custody of their 4 children while Addis received visitation rights. But even then, his obsession with power didn't diminish. In 1986, during a visit in Florida, he kidnapped the children, fleeing with them to Montana, where he hid them in an isolated cabin. The FBI's intervention resulted in his capture after 8 months, and he spent 18 months imprisoned for the felony offense, re-emerging as a felon in 1988. Later marriages to Sharon and Tony followed similar patterns. Brief, violent partnerships that dissolved into divorce, with Tony securing a restraining order following Addis's physical outbursts. By the time Addis met Joanne, he was skilled at reinventing himself, using stolen identities to blend into new environments, his true character hidden behind a mask of normalcy. Joanne, introduced to him through a gym patron named Tara Rivera, saw promise in this seemingly considerate man who showered her with attention, making her feel valued after years dedicated entirely to her daughters. Their relationship developed quickly over the summer, with Addis moving into Joanne's modest home where the sounds of children's play mixed with the hum of Las Vegas life outside. Initially, the relationship seemed hopeful. Addis helped with household tasks, interacting with the girls in ways that eased Joanne's concerns about integrating a new partner into their family unit. But cracks soon appeared. Slight at first, like shadows lengthening in the evening light. Addis began questioning Joanne's every decision, from her work schedule to her interactions with friends. His demeanor shifted from loving to demanding. Tara Rivera noticed it during a dinner out one night. A harmless comment from her caused Addis's face to twist in fury, his rage igniting like a sudden desert storm. Worried, Tara pulled Joanne aside later, warning her about the red flags, the volatile responses, the jealousy that seemed to tighten like a noose. Joanne confided to Tara that Addis wouldn't let her out of his sight, even following her to the bathroom. And she grew nervous about him living under the same roof with her vulnerable daughters. As weeks turned into months, the control intensified into outright abuse, both verbal and physical, leaving Joanne feeling trapped in her own home. She confided her fears to close friends and family, her voice trembling as she described arguments echoing through the night, waking the girls who pretended to sleep. Avoiding the tension, Joanne's brother, sensing danger, urged her to leave. But Addis's shadow loomed large. His past as a former officer gave him an aura of intimidation that was daunting even to those concerned for her welfare. During custody exchanges, Joanne's former husband, Tom, sensed the tension. Observing the uneasy atmosphere and Addis's watchful presence, Joanne knew in her heart she had to take a stand. Her devotion to her children sparked a determination to reclaim her independence and protect them from the poison seeping into their lives. On August 18, 1995, she made a pivotal decision, telling Tara she could no longer endure the abuse and control. She planned for a quiet evening, a pleasant dinner during which she intended to end the relationship, hoping for a separation without further conflict. Her heart heavy with the uncertainty ahead. That morning, Joanne dressed deliberately, her mind swirling with visions of freedom, of mornings free from fear, of hugging her daughters without constant vigil. She told her confidants that this was the day she'd break free from John Edwards, moving toward a life no longer shadowed by his influence. The night of August 18th began under the unforgiving Las Vegas sunlight, the air heavy with the smell of creosote bushes and distant casino exhaust. Joanne prepared for the dinner, her hand steady despite the knot in her core, imagining a conversation that would sever the ties binding her. Addis, either oblivious or sensing the shift, went about his usual activities, his truck parked outside like a sentinel. Friends later recalled Joanne's phone call that day, resolute yet tinged with worry. A mother defending her world at any cost. As twilight descended, casting shadows over the neighborhood, Joanne vanished from the lives of her loved ones, leaving a void that would haunt her family for decades. August 19th came and went with no word, but it was Sunday, August 20th, when concern peaked. Tom came by to return the children, noticing Addis's truck still there. But John was nowhere to be found. The girls entered the house calling for their mother, their voices echoing unanswered in rooms where lights burned unusually bright, and her bedroom door stood slightly ajar. Alarm mounting, they called their father, who immediately contacted the Las Vegas police, reporting Joanne missing and voicing suspicions about the boyfriend, who seemed unnaturally calm about her disappearance. Officers from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department responded quickly, taking down statements from the distressed family. Joanne's purse sat undisturbed in a closet, her keys and belongings scattered about as if she'd planned to return shortly. The daughters described the regular arguments, the loud quarrels that had become a nightly routine, painting a portrait of a relationship on the brink. Prompted by instinct, Joan's sister asked to inspect Addis's truck, finding items that sparked immediate suspicion. Evidence of his real identity as John Patrick Addis surfaced, a wanted man with a record including kidnapping and assault. The ID he'd been using belonged to a deceased Florida man, exposing his pseudonym and connecting him to his history in Alaska. Authorities dug deeper, finding Joanne's Honda Accord abandoned in a remote location near Prescott, Arizona, just 3 days after her disappearance. The vehicle was hidden in Little Hell Canyon, a desolate expanse of harsh terrain where the desert swallows secrets whole. Yet inside, everything was undisturbed. No signs of violence or missing items except for Joanne herself. It was as though she briefly stepped away and never returned. Officers remarked on its unsettling ordinariness while noting its deliberate concealment screamed foul play. As inquiries deepened, Addis's composure crumbled. He professed ignorance, claiming Joanne had left willingly, but inconsistencies emerged under questioning. When law enforcement returned to his home, his truck remained, but he had vanished, escaping just before authorities could close in. Devastated yet hopeful despite mounting evidence of wrongdoing, Joanne's family held fast, knowing she'd never desert her kids without reason. Her maternal love steadfast like stars above the desert. Investigators reconstructed events, speaking with neighbors who remembered their last intense argument. The palpable strain evident even at a distance. The search expanded, now targeting Addis as the main suspect, increasingly seen as a murderer given his past domestic brutality. His escape confirmed their gravest suspicions. Too young to fully comprehend, John's daughters asked daily about their mom's return, their innocence piercing the hearts of detectives who pledged resolution. Months became years, the case cooling while Addis evaded arrest, crossing borders effortlessly like one skilled lifelong in deceit. In late 1996, under a new alias, John Stone, Hay surfaced in Guadalajara, Mexico, working at Gold's Gym, where he met Laura Liliana Casillas Padilla. Unknowing of the monster beside them, they married and had 2 children, forming a semblance of family life in Chiapas. Yet the cycles repeated: control, isolation, and a constant sense of danger from which Laura could never escape. Meanwhile, in the United States, Hunters found Joanne's remains on October 15th, 1998, hidden in a thick brush of Little Hell Canyon, just a mile from where her car had been recovered. The bones, confirmed through dental records, showed signs of extreme violence. Her skull was fractured, and there were indicators of asphyxiation, a stark record of her final moments alive. This discovery devastated her family, offering closure mixed with profound sorrow as they mourned the woman whose life had been so abruptly stolen. Addis, now formally charged with murder, was placed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list in 1998. His face appeared on shows like America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries, appealing to viewers to help capture him. The manhunt stretched across years, with leads taking law enforcement from Mexico to Guatemala. Yet Addis stayed out of reach, his hidden existence a twisted mirror of the life he'd shattered. Joanne's family and friends held memorial services, their grief fueling efforts to support domestic violence survivors and raise awareness about the dangers lurking in controlling relationships. In 2005, after 7 years as a fugitive, a breakthrough seemed imminent when officials tracked reports of him to Central America. But fate intervened before justice could be served. On October 18, 2006, residents in Chiapas noticed an unusual silence from Addis's home. A foul odor led to a welfare check that uncovered a terrible scene. Laura and their 2 young children lay dead in their beds, killed by carbon monoxide from a faulty generator. Syringes lay scattered about, suggesting a deliberate act. Several weeks later in Guatemala City, Addis's body was discovered. Fingerprints confirmed his identity and showed he died from cardiac arrest at 56 years old. He was buried there. His era of terror ended not through the courts, but through his own physical decline, leaving a legacy of ruin. Joanne's story, though ending in tragedy, endures as a warning about love that turns lethal. Her legacy is cherished by those who remember her kindness and the unbreakable bond she shared with her daughters. The case closed with Addis's death, but the psychological wounds remain as a testament to the toll exacted when control eclipses compassion. In Las Vegas and beyond, her name represents the fight for justice, the pain of loss, and the enduring power of a mother's love.